Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight's story is titled, 7 Creepiest Graves Ever Discovered Across the U.S. We're traveling to the quiet edges of America, the places where the trees don't move unless the wind tells them to, and where the ground holds secrets it was never meant to share. Every grave you're about to hear about has been seen, touched, or documented by real people. Hikers, ranchers, caretakers, families. All of them walked away with the same feeling. Something beneath the soil was still aware. Before we begin, I'm trying to reach 4,000 subscribers this month. Nearly 90% of viewers listen and disappear. Don't drift into the dark like the rest. Subscribe now and stay with us. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it for you right now? If there's a grave, cemetery, or forgotten burial spot in your town that has a story behind it, drop its name below. Because when the world sleeps, and the dirt settles, not everything beneath it is dead. Kill the lights. Make sure you're alone. Take a slow breath. Let's begin. The first time I walked the west fence line on that parcel outside San Angelo, the dust stuck to my boots like chalk. Out there, the ground is pale and hard in the sun, and when trucks pass on the highway, you don't hear the engine as much as you hear a long, tired hiss. The windmills throw slow shadows over prickly pear and broken posts. It's a quiet kind of land. Might sound boring, but that kind of quiet used to settle me. I do appraisals on ranch properties, and after my divorce last spring, it felt easier to be where the only schedules are wind and daylight. The place belonged to an old rancher who died without a will. A bank wanted to auction it, so they hired me to walk it, check the fences, count troughs, and make notes about the condition of the structures. Paperwork said a single-story house, a rotting barn, and an equipment shed all abandoned for years. No water rights, no improvements beyond the old stuff. That checked out when I pulled up. Roof shingles curled like old bark. A cattle guard sagged. The porch had a busted swing that hung at an angle, sighing whenever the wind picked up. The bank sent the dead man's nephew to unlock the gate and hand me a folder. He was mid-20s, quiet, baseball cap pulled low. He said his name once, Keegan, and then switched to looking at my shoulder or past me. The tap of his boot on the truck step was louder than anything he said. He pointed out the north boundary with his chin and told me the old man never let anyone camp out here. Then he said he had another job and left. I watched his dust tail pull away along the 2-track and thought I'd never met someone who could make an exit feel like an apology. My plan was simple. Loop the fence, mark down repairs, get a look at the house, photograph the barn, head home. One of those clean days. No surprises. It was late morning, hardly any wind, just enough to make the mesquite leaves whisper now and then. I walked with my notebook open and my phone set to record time and GPS. This job is part eyes and part habit. Pick up wire, note where T-posts lean, check corners. A few windmills squeaked. Distant dogs barked where the land drops toward the river. Every so often I'd stop and just scan the ground. That's how I saw it. At first it didn't register. The hill to the west was the color of bone and it rolled gentle like a shoulder. On the near side of that slope there was a mound that didn't match the natural lay. It was a little longer than a door and maybe knee-high at the center, flat on top, tidy as if someone had smoothed it with a plank. Stuck right at the head end was a rusted horseshoe, standing like a letter. It wasn't nailed or tied. It was just sunk into the dirt like a marker. I walked closer. The dirt looked newer than the ground around it, a little darker, as if it had been turned and packed. No rocks laid out, no wire cross, just that horseshoe and the kind of clean you only see when somebody takes their time. I said out loud, "What are you?" This kind of thing happens sometimes, old family plots, dead cows buried shallow, dogs. You see a mound, you note it, you ask for records. So I took a photo, wrote down the GPS and finished the loop. The rest of that first day was normal. The south fence needed 2 new braces. The barn smelled like dry, rotten owls. In the house, I found a boot print trail through dust from some earlier visit, probably the nephew, and a shelf of jam jars with chalky rings where lids used to be. The kitchen radio was missing, but the cord dangled from the wall like someone cut it with a knife. At one point, I thought I heard the screen door bump in the breeze, but when I checked, it was just the spring letting the frame settle. I left around 4. Sun slanted low. A hawk rode the thermals over the field, and a couple of cows from a neighbor's place stared me down like I knew something they didn't. That night, Back at my rental, I searched the county records. No burials on that parcel, no easements for a cemetery, nothing. I emailed the bank contact and asked if the family ever mentioned a grave or memorial. She replied a few hours later with exactly what you'd expect, not to my knowledge. Next morning I drove out early. I called ahead to see if Keegan could meet me because I wanted to ask him, but it went to voicemail. I told him it wasn't urgent. The sky was washed out and bright. I parked by the house and started toward the West Hill again. There's a path your feet remember after even one trip. I rounded the mesquite and paused. The mound looked not different but clearer, like it had been combed. The horseshoe stood as before. The dirt, though, had a texture to it, finely grooved as if small tines had pulled across the surface. There weren't any footprints around it. No boot marks. No coyote pads. It was so clean that the clean itself was a mark. Coyotes had been singing the night before, according to the neighbor down the road, but I didn't see scat or tracks anywhere near that hill. The only prints in the dust were my own from yesterday, leading up to the mound and then off again. Those were crisp, exactly where I'd set them. It made me feel watched in a way I don't like to admit. The kind of feeling you get in a motel hallway when a door you just passed clicks very softly. I told myself it was nothing. Somebody had been out to tidy a memorial. That would be the reasonable idea. I walked the north fence and worked my list. The wind died completely after noon. That's rare out there. The silence made the power lines hum like a low whistle. I headed back to the house for water and stood in the kitchen a minute, enjoying the shade. Something about the quiet in that place wasn't the same as outside. You could hear small ticks, then nothing. Then small ticks again, like pipes cooling and heating even though the water had been shut off long ago. The back hallway was darker than it should have been, given the windows. The bathroom door stood open halfway. My eyes kept catching it, expecting a person to step out, but no one did. I drank, shook it off, and went back to the hill. I can get stubborn when something nags me. On the third day, I brought a small probe. That's a thin rod I use to test soil around posts. I wasn't planning to dig anything up. I just wanted to know if it was a pile of rocks under there or loose fill. I texted Keegan again, asked if there was any family story I should know. He sent a single reply. Don't mess with it. Not ours, that was all. I stared at that line for a while. Not ours? The wind picked up before noon, so I took a slow route, cutting through the stand of juniper near the barn. The air smelled like pencil shavings. As I stepped out, I saw movement on the hill. A woman in a denim shirt stood near the mound, head bent. She had a long braid down her back. She didn't look up when I called out. The sound felt wrong, like I shouldn't have put my voice on that scene. Ma'am? I tried again. Bank sent me to appraise the place. You okay out here? She turned slightly but kept her eyes down, and then she walked off toward the road. The way she moved, too steady for the slope, like she'd walked that line 100 times. I took a step to follow, then changed my mind. I was a stranger out there, and this wasn't city business. It isn't unusual either. People still come out to places where they once lived, and the dead man had been around a long time. I watched her go until the mesquite blocked my view, then I looked back at the mound. The probe slipped in about 5 inches and then met something firm. Not rock, not caliche. Wood, maybe. I eased off. There was nothing smart about pushing farther if this was a grave. I took one more photo, texted the GPS to the bank, and called it for the day. That evening, I drove into town for groceries. The woman at the register asked if I was the one working the Mendez place. I asked how she knew. She said my boots were too clean for anyone who actually lived there. Then she asked how I liked the hill. I said I didn't know it had a name. She said the old man called it Caliche Hill. That was that. When I got back to the rental, I made coffee even though it was late. I sat at the table and tried to read a ranch history book I keep around to make myself feel like I'm doing something. The words wouldn't stay put. When the air conditioner kicked off, I realized I was listening. Not for anything in the apartment, just listening. It was hard to say to what. It felt like the first seconds after a phone call ends, when you keep the phone to your ear because your brain expects a voice that isn't there anymore. I decided I would finish the appraisal the next day regardless. There are times to be thorough and times to accept the limits of what you can know. I told myself I was letting a dirt pile get under my skin because I'd let a lot of other things get under my skin this year, and this one was easier to focus on. The fourth morning, clouds sat low, smudging the sky. I unlocked the gate myself. The padlock stuck, then gave with a click that echoed. I parked in the same spot as before and shut off the truck. It felt different the instant the engine noise died. The windmills weren't turning. I could hear the quiet in layers. Nearest was the sound of my breath, then the stillness under that. And below that, another kind of pressure you only notice when your ears want something to fill them. I forced myself to do the house first. Old houses have a way of saving small sounds for when you're alone. The screen door eased back against its frame. The floor had that soft bow you get near a hallway. As I stepped into the living room, I smelled something like cold dust, but sharper, almost sweet. It made my tongue feel strange. A strand of spiderweb clung to the doorway, and without thinking, I rubbed it between finger and thumb. It felt like hair more than silk. In the back bedroom, the closet door was closed. That didn't match my memory. I was sure it had been open on day one. I stood with my hand on the knob for a few seconds. Then I let go, stepped back, and kept moving. There's no reason to pick a fight with a feeling. I heard something then, a slow, thin sound like a person trying not to cry. I held still. It came from deeper in the house, somewhere around the bathroom. I called out, "Hello?" And the sound went quiet. I waited a few seconds and then stepped into the hallway. The bathroom door stood closed now, even though I'd left it open. I was certain. The air around that door felt cooler. I set my palm against it, cold soaked into my skin. I opened the door a few inches. The room was dim. The small high window had dirt on it, and the light came in shaped like a smear. The noise didn't return. Nothing moved. I could see my breath just a little, even though the rest of the house was warm. I closed the door again and walked out into the kitchen with my jaw tight like I was biting a mouthguard. Outside felt better, but not by much. The wind hadn't come up. The world looked like someone had turned down the color. I headed straight for the hill. When it came into view, I stopped. The mound had a smoothness I hadn't seen before. The edges were neater. The top looked freshly patted by flat hands. The horseshoe stood there like someone had pushed it deeper. The arc now almost flush with the dirt. Around the base, I saw the faintest suggestions of lines. Not footprints exactly. More like weight had shifted carefully without leaving marks. The coyotes had skirted the whole area. I could tell because their tracks started near the windmill, then veered wide in a gentle arc. I took off my hat and scratched the back of my head because it's what my body does when my brain has run out of immediate explanations. That's when I heard tires crunching gravel by the gate. Keegan pulled in behind me, dust rolling over his hood and then settling. He got out, shut his door soft, and walked over with his eyes on the hill. "You saw it," he said. His voice was sanded down. He didn't greet me, didn't ask how the job was going. "Yeah," I said. "I've been seeing it." He kept his gaze on the mound. "You didn't find anything in the house?" "I'm finding lots of things in the house," I said, and heard how that sounded. "If there's a burial here, the bank needs to know." He kicked at nothing with the toe of his boot. "It's not a registered one," he said. "And it isn't my uncle's. He didn't put that there." "Who did?" Keegan looked toward the road, then toward the horizon where the low hills blur in heat when it's hot. It wasn't hot, but he looked like a man measuring distance anyway. "When I was a kid," he said, "my mother stopped at the gate one time. She told me not to look to the left. So of course I looked. I saw the mound. No horseshoe then. Just a little rise. After she wouldn't come this way anymore. Said the hill takes what you talk about. I don't know what that means. He didn't like visitors. Maybe he knew it's better if folks don't come out. I only came because you called twice." He started to leave then, like that was all he had. I said, "Hold on. I need to finish the survey. I'll be quick, but I want to check one thing." I held up the probe again. He watched me walk to the mound and he didn't say no. That seemed like permission. Or surrender. I pushed the probe in where I'd done it before. Same resistance at 5 inches. I moved a foot down. Resistance sooner. I widened and tried again. Every spot had that give, then something solid. If it was a coffin, it was shallow and smaller than it should have been. Against every instinct I had, I knelt and brushed a little dust off the top with my fingertips. The grains were cold in a way soil shouldn't be at that hour. It felt like touching the outside of a fridge. I told myself I would just clear a palm-sized area, enough to see if it was a rock or wood. The ground gave quietly. A thin piece of wood showed beneath, pale, splintered. I eased a little more soil away. The wood had small round holes along one side, evenly spaced like where pegs used to be. That's when the picture formed in my mind. Not a coffin board, a rail, the kind you'd see on a crib. I sat back too fast and my hand sunk into the dirt behind me. It was softer there. My palm came up coated in chalky gray, and in the gray were flakes of white that weren't rock and weren't shell. They crumbled when I pressed them, making a dry hiss like paper. Something in my body said stand up, so I did. Keegan was at my shoulder without my hearing him walk over. His face had a pinched look I recognized from my own bathroom mirror the day the judge signed the papers. He whispered, "That's enough," like we were in a church. We stepped back together. The horseshoe looked different now that I'd seen the rail. It was a bad joke of a headstone. Something about the shape makes you think of luck and homes and animals that work. It didn't look like luck there. "I'll tell the bank there's a burial," I said. "They'll pull the listing." "That's what happens. There'll be questions. You'll get calls." He shook his head. "You can tell them. They'll do what they do. But if you write it down plain, more folks come. They did before. When I was a teenager, a couple came out with their truck and a cooler and took pictures standing with it. They laughed till they left. Next week the mound was taller. After my uncle died, I put the horseshoe there to make it look like a joke, so people wouldn't take it serious. It didn't help. "Who's under there?" I asked. The question surprised me as it came out, because I didn't really want to know. He said, "I don't think it works like that." He walked away without another word, got in his truck, and backed out slow. He didn't look at me. Dust folded over the hood and vanished as if it fell at the same time it rose. I didn't feel like finishing the fence line. I stood there until my legs started to ache. Then I brushed the disturbed soil back over the wood as gently as I could. I set the horseshoe straight by pushing it with the edge of my boot. It felt wrong to touch it with my hands. The rest of that day had the feel of being inside a room where a TV used to be on and someone suddenly turned it off. At the barn, I heard a noise behind a wall like footsteps, then realized it was the wind starting up again, pushing old boards. I checked my watch too often, something I do when a job loses its shape. As I gathered my tools, I noticed a drag mark on the concrete floor of the shed, from the back wall to the door, faint as a memory. It wasn't there earlier. Maybe I had missed it. I decided to have missed it. Before I left, I walked the hill one more time. The light had shifted. Shadows lay long and flat. A buzzard floated high and indifferent. I stood by the mound and tried to be polite in my head, the way my grandmother taught me when we drove past cemeteries. I didn't say anything. I just let that feeling sit. The drive back into town took 15 minutes. I kept my speed exactly at the limit. I don't remember the music that was on. When I got to my place, I pulled the folder out again, went through the papers like they might offer a normal answer this time. They didn't, because they never do when you want it. I filed the report a day later, marked the structures as salvageable or not, wrote down what I could about the fences, the roof, the barn. For the hill, I used the language I've used before. Unidentified burial-like feature observed near west boundary. Recommend halt on sale pending survey and appropriate county consultation. I didn't include the crib rail. A sentence like that doesn't sit right in a report you have to send to people who have to make decisions. The bank replied that they'd put everything on hold. I felt both good and useless. Nothing I did changed what that place is. I went back one more time to return a gate key. I didn't walk to the mound. I stood at the fence and watched the wind move the grass in small waves. A pickup slowed on the road and then kept going. I thought about the woman with the braid and whether she had come back, and if she stood there in the quiet the way I had, trying to decide what kind of silence it was. After that, I stopped taking rural jobs for a while. The work pays better out there, and most days it's straightforward, but I kept catching myself listening at the edges of rooms. Even in town, elevators would open 3 floors down and I'd hear it like a person breathing behind a wall. That hill made me notice the way the air shifts in a house when someone moves in another room. You can't unlearn that. My friends said I looked tired. My ex-wife called about some paperwork and asked whether I was eating. I told her yes. I told her I was doing smaller assignments in town, apartments and single houses, nothing fancy. She said that sounded smart. I agreed because it was easier than saying the other thing out loud. A month later, I drove past the San Angelo Fairgrounds and saw a booth selling old farm junk. On the table was a box of horseshoes. They were the same rust color, the same shape. I left without buying anything. It wasn't superstition. I just didn't want to bring that shape home. Now, when I wake up at night, it's usually because the air conditioner shut off and the silence yanked me awake. I'll listen for a minute, for pipes ticking, for someone shifting in bed, for a door setting back in its frame. Most of the time it's nothing. Once in a while I'll hear a sound far away out on the road, a truck brake that breathes, and I'll think of that slow, steady braid moving away from the hill. I don't talk about this much. People want either a clean supernatural story or an easy explanation. I can't give either. The nephew said, "It isn't ours." He could have meant the land. He could have meant the thing under it. He could have meant the feeling that still shows up in my kitchen when the fridge motor clicks off. I don't know. What I do know is that I touched wood that isn't from a coffin, and I felt soil turn cold under a sun that warms everything else. And after that, the quiet changed shape in my head. I hope that's enough for you. If it isn't, go walk that hill. You'll get your own idea just fine. Some graves are quiet, because everyone learned not to talk about them. The mosquitoes were already bad that morning. The air had that heavy, wet feel that makes your shirt stick to your back by 9. I parked by the rutted pull-off off Fort Argyle Road and walked the path down to the water with my clipboard in a plastic bag. The river was low. You could see the silty shelf and the grass laid flat like hair combed one way. I could hear trucks on the highway in a slow wash, then a gap, then the sound came back again. Every few seconds a dragonfly went past my face and you could hear its wings. A thin clicking. It was an erosion map day, which means measuring from a fixed stake to the waterline and taking a GPS point and a few photos. Nobody stops you if you look like you have a purpose, and I had a neon vest and a faded ball cap with the group logo. People saw the vest and decided I must know what I was doing. I like that. It keeps things simple. Maya met me there late, waving an iced coffee and apologizing because she'd missed the exit. She does that every other day and promises she won't again. We split the stretch into 2 sections and agreed to meet back at the pull-off by noon. I started north along the bank where the path turns soft and the mud smells like hot pennies. There were those little fiddler crabs snapping and going into their holes, tiny clicking all around when you stepped close. I'd been on that section once before. There was a tree with a big scar where lightning had taken the top off years ago. Now a natural marker in my head. Beyond it, the river bends and there's a little patch of granite pushed up in a cluster like somebody set building stones there and forgot them. That granite is wrong for the place. Everything else is sand and dark clay. The block sits on the edge like a table someone shoved too close to the stairs. The first time I saw it, I thought it was just rock. The second time I noticed the numbers. Old smooth cut, not deep. 1968, nothing else. No name, no sign. It's the kind of thing you expect to see in a cemetery. Not on a riverbank where fishermen clean catfish on a Saturday afternoon. That first day I'd brushed sand off it with my hand and told Maya on the way back, "Did you see that weird stone?" She said, "What stone?" I said, "The granite with the date." She looked at me like I was trying to mess with her and said she didn't know what I was talking about. I thought she was doing a bit. She does bits. We moved on. Today I saw it again. Same spot, granite with the date. The top was a little darker from dew or maybe from the way the shade fell. I wrote the stakes measurements, then walked over and looked at the year. 1968. The cut was clean in that way old cuts get, the corners softened by time. I took out my phone and snapped a picture from a couple of angles, then stepped back and took another with the river behind it. Might as well tag it in our notes. Not our job, but I keep track of things. It was quiet out there. The loudest sound was my own breathing and the little plops of fish at the surface. On my way back, a John boat passed with an outboard that sounded tired. 2 men sat low inside it. One nodded at me. One looked down into the river like he was counting weeds. I raised a hand. They didn't wave back. That didn't bother me. Guys who fish early don't wave much. It's like they don't want to break whatever careful mood they've set with the river. When I got to the pull-off, Maya was sitting on the tailgate scribbling numbers. "You ready?" She said. "Almost," I said. "That granite has a date carved in it." "What granite?" "The stone at the bend, by the old lightning tree." I watched her to see if she'd say, "Oh, that thing." She blew on her coffee like it could get any colder. "Did you get photos?" she asked. "Yeah," I said and held out my phone. She leaned in and in that patch of sun I scrolled through. The river, the scarred tree, the flat stone, except the photos of the stone were wrong. Everything around it was in focus, the river, the mud, even a crushed beer can next to it. But the rectangle where the granite sat was a blur, like I'd moved the phone on purpose or like the air above it was moving fast. I don't shake. I take hundreds of pictures for these projects. I know how to hold a phone still. I frowned and scrolled again. The blur was there in every shot where the stone showed up. In the others where it didn't, the pictures were fine. "You need more coffee," Maya said, not really looking. "You look weird." "I'll go back and take another one," I said. "Or we could eat," she said, crumpling her wrapper into the bag and missing. I went back. The sun was higher. The air felt thicker, like when the clouds clamped down before a storm, but there weren't any clouds, just that hard white glare. I walked the path and felt the mud give slightly with each step. The crabs went in their holes like before. I could hear laughter across the water where maybe some kids were playing. Then it cut off clean like someone unplugged a radio. The stone was there. 1968. I put my phone right over it and took a burst of photos. Tap, tap, tap. Then a video. I held the phone steady and talked into it, saying, "Just for the record," like an idiot, and panned from my boots up to the numbers. In the phone screen, the place where the numbers should be was a haze. I blinked. I held my breath. I slowly moved the phone side to side. The blur stayed like a block of fog over the stone. I backed up and took one more, then gave up. As I turned, I felt what I thought was a mosquito on my ear, but there wasn't anything there. Just the sound of river water sliding against the bank and a far truck shifting gears. Maya squinted at my screen and said, "Your lens is dirty." "It's clean," I said. I showed her another photo from earlier. "Perfect." Then back to the stone, blur. "I got nothing at that bend," she said. "Weird." "You walked past it," I said. "I go where my stakes are," she said. "You know how Doug is about staying in the plot." "We done here?" "I'm starving." We got tacos at a place near Garden City. The air inside the restaurant felt cold enough to make my fingers stiff. The TV in the corner was on some morning news show. Nothing I paid attention to. We sat and I kept seeing the blur in the back of my mind, like it had burned into the view you get when you close your eyes against the sun. Maya told a story about her neighbor's dog climbing their fence and getting stuck. I laughed in the right places. Before we split, I said, "You didn't see the stone, but you remember the scarred tree, right?" "I remember a lot of trees," she said. "The one with the lightning scar. Half dead." She frowned, sucking salsa off her thumb. "I remember that stake marker. You want me to go back with you?" "No," I said too fast. "It's fine." "Okay," she said. Then she looked at me again. "You've got a mosquito bite behind your ear," she said. That afternoon, I put the pictures into the project folder. When I printed proofs for the binder, Doug likes paper backups, every image was sharp except the ones with the stone. Those were fuzzy right where it was. I hadn't told Doug about it. He doesn't like off-topic. He's got a way where he'll listen, then let a long silence sit until you feel like you've made a mistake. He's not mean. He just doesn't help when you're unsure. On my way out, I dropped the envelope off for the print shop. Pat, who runs the counter, opened it and flipped through like she always does. "You've got a little smudge in a couple," she said, touching one with a fingernail. "You want me to correct?" "What smudge?" I asked. She showed me an 8x10 where you could see the river and the bank and this rectangle of washed-out gray in the center where the stone was. "Bad batch of paper," she said. "It happens. It's fine," I said. I left it. Maybe paper would show something a screen didn't. At home, I showered twice. That iron smell clings. I live in a small shotgun house near Thunderbolt, old wood floors that make the same complaining noise when you step on certain lines. The AC rattles when it kicks on. I set the pictures on the dining table and left them. I thought about texting Maya, then didn't. I made rice and black beans and watched the fan move slow on the ceiling. Around 10, I heard water in the wall. At first, I thought the upstairs neighbor, that's a joke, there's no upstairs, had turned on a sink, but the sound had that outside quality, like the river after a boat passes and the wake slaps the bank. I muted the TV. It went quiet. I stood up. I heard it again. A gentle sliding, a wash, then a steady trickle. The bathroom wasn't running. The kitchen faucet wasn't dripping. I walked from room to room, listening with my hand on the wall. Every few seconds, I felt a cool spot through the paint like the pipes ran there. But the house is old. The plumbing zigzags. You can't tell what's what. I went back to the table and looked at the prints. The ones with the stone were still wrong. It wasn't just blur. It looked like a reflection or a glare in a place where there shouldn't be any. The light on the river was even that day. I took a pen and circled the gray rectangle. I wrote 1968 next to it. I put them back in the envelope when the sound came again, stronger, like a bucket tipped somewhere inside the wall and the water slid down. I slept badly. In the middle of the night, I woke because the AC had cut off and the house was too still. When the fan isn't humming, you notice every other noise. There was something like a footstep on the porch, but not heavy. A scrape. I lay there counting my breathing. I told myself it was a raccoon. The clock said 3:11 a.m. I stared until it said 3:19, then fell asleep without remembering how. The next morning, I went back to the river alone. Doug had asked if I could grab a couple more readings while I was out. He suggested the southeast bend near an older property everyone calls Cheevers, after the family that used to own it. I put the vest on in my car so I'd look official if anybody came out to ask what I was doing. It was a Tuesday. No fishermen at that hour. The sky had that flat gray that makes you think, maybe rain, maybe not. As I walked down the slope, a woman came out from a small white house with a tin roof and stood with her hands on her hips like she was going to say something. I smiled and waved the clipboard. "Survey," I said. She nodded but didn't smile back. Behind her, a plastic hummingbird feeder bumped against the window frame, although there wasn't enough wind to move it that way. I took my measurements fast. The air pressed closer. The bank here was more clay, the kind that sucks at your boot soles. At Cheevers Bend, there was another stake, and my eye went straight past it to a shape near the waterline. For a second, I thought there was a second stone, but no. It was a cooler someone had left. Flipped open, a rotten smell starting. I didn't look inside. I might be curious, but I'm not that kind of curious. As I shouldered my bag, a guy in a floppy hat came around the bend carrying a rod. He had sun marks on his cheeks that made his skin look like cracked paint. He slowed when he saw me. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I said. He looked at my vest, then at the river, then at me. "Y'all mapping?" he asked. "Erosion," I said. "Just seeing how it's moving." He nodded and stared at the water for so long that I felt like I should leave. But he kept standing there. It was a long kind of silence that didn't feel rude, just stubborn. When he finally spoke, he said, "You see that rock up by the bend last week?" His voice had the drag of someone who spends more time alone than not. "The granite?" I said. He tipped his chin down once. "I saw it yesterday," I said. He licked his lips. His eyes stayed on the river. "You work with the county?" "Just a volunteer group," I said. "I'm Carolyn." It slipped out of me like I needed to be a person with a name right then. He didn't give his back. He pointed his chin downstream. "That rock," he said, "don't fool with it." "I wasn't going to," I said. He nodded again, then glanced at me for the first time. His eyes were a pale hazel mild. He didn't look like he was trying to scare me. He looked tired. "We tried moving it," he said, his voice almost not there against the sound of the water. "The river didn't like that." He said it like a simple fact, like saying the mail came late. The way he said "we" gave me a picture I didn't want. 2 or 3 people straining with a strap around the stone, the strap biting their palms, the river sudden against their legs. I didn't say anything. He adjusted his hat and walked on. I stood there with my bag on my shoulder and felt my heart pace pick up for no reason that made sense. It's a stupid line, I know. The river didn't like that. Bodies of water don't like things or dislike things. They move, they pull, they rise and drop. Still, the way he walked away without looking to see if I laughed made it feel like not a joke. On my way back up the bank, the woman at the White House was still on her porch. She had a cigarette now. The feeder knocked against the window in a slow, steady bump. I lifted my hand to wave. She turned and went inside. I told myself I was finished with the stone. I wasn't going to tell Maya about the fisherman. She would tease me and imitate his voice for a week. I would laugh each time and then later find the laughter stuck in my throat. But on Thursday after work, I stopped at the print shop to pick up the pictures. Pat slid the envelope over and said, "You want to look before you pay?" She knows I like to check. I spread them on the counter. The ones without the stone looked normal. Sun on the river, grass bent by the wake. In the ones with the stone, the gray blur was darker. The edges around it were sharper, like the blur had a boundary. Pat leaned in and sniffed. "Smells like the river," she said and laughed at herself. I lifted one close to my face and thought she was right. There was a faint iron smell in the paper, or I imagined it and then couldn't unimagine it. "Everything okay?" Pat asked. "Fine," I said. "Thanks." At home, I put the photos on my table again like a kid spreading cards. I circled the blur and dated the corner. The light went and I forgot to turn on a lamp. I sat there in the dark until the room was just the few street lights coming through the blinds. I was listening again, expecting the soft wash in the wall. It came, not constant. A slide, then a slight tap like a thrown pebble, then a pause. I felt my breath go shallow and made myself take a long one. I put my hand down flat on the table to steady myself and touch damp. My palm came away wet. I stood up fast and knocked the chair back. It hit the floor and skidded. I turned on the overhead and looked at the table. The envelope had a halo of water around it, a ring like condensation from a glass. The underside was wet. I picked it up and water dripped from the corner. Nothing else on the table was wet. The wood under the envelope was dark with it. I wiped it with a dish towel. It smelled like the river again. That penny smell. I held the envelope open over the sink and let the water run out. It wasn't much. It just shouldn't have been there at all. I told myself I was sweating and maybe the envelope had been under my arm, and that's why my hand got wet. I told myself a lot of things. I put the photos on the counter to dry and went to bed with a towel under the lamp that makes that soft buzzing sound, like there's a fly you can't find. I had another bad night. At 2 a.m., I woke because I thought someone had coughed in the hallway. I sat up and listened and realized I could smell that iron again. Faint, but there. The house was quiet except for the fridge and a car going by 2 streets over. I got up and checked the front door and the back. Both locked. I stood in the hallway and looked toward the dining room and saw that the light from the street had that moving quality you get when water is reflecting. Little ripples on the ceiling, only there's no water on my ceiling. I took a step forward. The shadows went flat. I took a step back. They came back. I stayed there too long trying to decide if I was being stupid. In the morning, my neighbor Mrs. Langley was in her yard watering potted plants with a can because her hose burst last month and she hasn't gotten a new one. She's older, doesn't miss much. She said, "You're out early," and then set the can down and frowned. "You spill something?" she asked. I looked at the bottom step of my porch. The wood was dark like it had been damp and then dried. There were small streaks on the riser, darker lines like water had run off at an angle. "I guess I had the cooler out," I said. I didn't have a cooler out. I heard myself say it anyway. She nodded like that explained it. "They say we'll get rain this weekend," she said. "It's needed." Then she squinted at me in that way she has when she's deciding whether to pry. She didn't. At work, Doug wanted to know why the Cheevers Bend numbers didn't match last month's. I told him about a possible misread and said I'd go again. He tapped his pencil against the table and said, "Make sure you do." He didn't ask about the stone. I didn't tell him. Maya looked at me across the desk and mouthed, "You okay?" I said, "Fine." That word kept coming out of me, fine, fine. On Friday, after I sent some emails, I went to the library to look up old maps. The librarian is a man with a long braid and a calm voice. He pointed me to the local history room where the air is cooler and there's always one person asleep in a chair. I pulled old survey documents, real ones full of deeds and lines. I looked for 68 and the family names along the river. I didn't know what I was looking for exactly. I wanted the numbers to mean something like a grave date on a grave. But it was just 1968, that could mean anything. That could be when someone brought that stone down to the water for no reason. Or it could be when someone cut it. One of the old plat maps had Cheevers listed along the bend and a small X with a note that the bank had collapsed by a certain number of feet in the late 60s. No mention of granite, no mention of a marker. The librarian came by and set a glass of water on the table for me. He always does that. He says I forget to drink. I thanked him, and when I looked back at the map, a drop had fallen off the glass onto the paper. I jumped up and blotted it with my sleeve. He said, "Oh, sorry," in that calm voice. "I'll get a coaster." "It's fine," I said and smiled. He went to the desk. I put the map away and checked out with a postcard book of old river photographs. I glanced through them outside in the hot light. Men on docks, women with updos and Sunday dresses, a full-page shot of a flood from 1969, not long after the date on the rock covering yards and steps. A human chain formed up to a porch. Even in a black and white, you could see the water lapping like a mouth. That night I put the postcards on my table next to the drying prints. The blur had changed. It wasn't flat anymore. If I tilted the picture, the gray looked raised, like there was a shape beneath that wanted to be understood by light at a certain angle. My eyes tried to fix it into something. I turned it this way and that and did not find anything I could name. My head started to hurt, a dull ache behind my eyes. I heard the water again in the wall. A slow wash. I walked into the hall and stood with my hand against it. Cold. On the other side of that wall is the neighbor's house, but she doesn't have a faucet there. I know because last winter we had a leak and we tore open that whole area. The sound faded. I told myself I was tired, and that sounds blend at night. On Saturday morning, I drove to the bend with a roll of flagging tape. I wanted to see how deep the stone was set, if it moved at all. I told myself this was just curiosity. I told myself nothing would happen. The sky was bright and the humidity had settled in. A few people were set up with lawn chairs and rods downriver. I walked past them, eyes on my path. At the stone, I crouched and pressed my fingers along the edges. Cool. The top had grit, but the face with the numbers was smooth. I tied the flagging tape around one corner like a ribbon, tight. I tugged. Nothing. I stood and put my heel against the side and pressed. It did not move the way a huge thing does not move. I stepped back and took a breath and listened. Dragonflies clicked. A gull made that ugly noise up in the bright air. Everything was ordinary. A man stood up from a chair farther down and stretched. He walked toward me slow, a limp in his step. He had a goatee gone white around the mouth and a baseball cap sweat dark at the brim. "You part of the county?" he asked. "No," I said. "Volunteer group." He looked at my tape on the rock, then at me. "Don't mark that," he said. "I'm not marking it," I said. "Just trying something." "I wouldn't," he said. His voice was soft. He wasn't threatening. He didn't move closer. He stared at the river while he talked, like looking at me would make things different. "We tried moving it once," he said. "We?" I heard my voice thinner than I meant it to be. "Boys got a chain around it after that big rain last year. Thought it'd be funny to roll it into the water." Something tugged back hard, like harder than current. They dropped it quick. Then the bank did this little slide like it was saying no more, you know? He squinted. "You can laugh. I know it sounds dumb." "I'm not laughing," I said. I wasn't. He nodded and walked back to his chair. He didn't look over his shoulder. I stood with my hands at my sides and felt that mild rush you get after almost stumbling. I bent, untied the tape, stuffed it in my pocket. I took 2 steps back. The river sounded the same, but the hairs on my arms had risen. That night I woke up because I thought someone had said my name in the room. I sat up and listened to the AC and the empty space around it. My name did not come again. There was just the sense that someone stood near the door. I didn't turn on the light. I stared until my eyes watered. The dark has shapes you know are not real, and those are less scary than the dark that offers you nothing at all. I got up, went to the sink and filled a glass and drank. The water out of the tap tasted tinny for a second. I ran it for a while and tried again. Better. I went back to bed and lay on my back and thought about that date, 1968. I thought about how people here don't like to talk about things, how they slide past the part of a story where something would make you pause. I thought about the fishermen who don't wave. I dozed. I woke to the softest sound and didn't know if it was in the house or in me. Sunday I drove out to the farmer's market with Maya. She wanted peaches. We walked under the tents and said hi to the same faces. She picked up tomatoes and put them down and picked them up again. I told her about the man with the chain story. She said, "People say things." We walked in silence for a minute. She said, "We all pretend not to see stuff sometimes. What do you pretend not to see?" I asked. I meant to keep it light. It came out wrong. She glanced at me quick. "You're doing a tone," she said. "I'm not doing this with you." She paid for her peaches. We got coffees. The fan in the tent spun slow and made a bird's nest of warmer air under it. On the way out, an old man at a table of tools said, "You girls stay away from that river. Bad currents this week." He probably says that every week. In the afternoon, I printed the video I'd taken by the stone frame by frame. In each still, you could see everything but the part you wanted to see. Light, dark, the seam of the bank, a dragonfly, and one frozen with its wings out. The granite area was a smear that didn't blur the same way each time. It had a darker patch low, like something under the surface the camera tried to resolve and gave up on. I stared until I felt a headache throb behind my eyes. That evening, I took a shower and stood in the cool water for a long time with my forehead against the tile. The water from my tap is not the river. It runs through the city and the plant and the pipes, and then it comes out. It is treated and measured. Still, I kept thinking about the smell in the envelope and the wet ring on my table. At midnight, there were footsteps outside on the porch, slow and deliberate. I lay there in bed and counted them. 1, 2, 3, then a long pause. Then another that sounded like whoever it was had shifted weight. Mrs. Langley has a grandson who comes by sometimes and thinks it's funny to knock and run. I waited for the knock. It didn't come. The footsteps went down the steps. The bottom one creaked, the way it does when I go down to take the trash. Then it was quiet. I got up, opened the door, and stepped out. The night air had that wet blanket feel. It wasn't cold or warm. It was just there. The street was empty. A moth banged the porch light. I stood and listened to the far sound of the river that you don't realize you can hear until you are trying to listen for it. When trucks aren't passing, you can hear a kind of dull hush. I thought about the stone. I thought about being seen. That specific sick feeling when you're on a stage and haven't realized it yet. On Monday, I told Doug I was done with the bend measurements. He said good without looking up. He asked for the binder. I handed it over. He flipped it open and stopped on a photo with the blur. He tapped it. "What's this?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. It sounded like an excuse. He turned the page and there was another. He tilted it away from the fluorescent light. The blur stayed. "You need to go back and retake," he said. "I don't want to," I said. It came out before I could frame it more professionally. He looked up. "Okay," he said after a beat. "I'll send someone else," I nodded. "Thanks." Maya was out that day on a different section. I went home early and sat in the weird quiet of the house that feels like it's listening to you. I pulled the blinds to let light in and realized I didn't want to look at my own windows. I put a pot of water on the stove to make pasta, and when it started to boil, the burble sounded wrong for a second, like the pitch wasn't right. I turned it off and dumped it in the sink and stood there with the steam against my face and couldn't explain to myself what exactly I thought was happening. That evening, I drove to a section of river I don't work on. I parked and stood by the fence at the public park and watched the water. It moved like always, a steady slide with little blips at stems and branches. A blue heron stood as still as a lawn ornament, and then jabbed fast at something and swallowed it. A couple with a baby in a carrier walked by. The baby kicked its feet and made a soft sound. The couple didn't look at the water. Nobody does unless they have a reason. A man sat on a bench and smoked. He looked over at me once and then looked back at the water. After a long time, he said, "You see that stone over by the bend up past Argyle?" I stared at him. I hadn't said a word about it. I hadn't gone there today. I hadn't told a stranger about it at a park. "I've seen it," I said. He nodded. He didn't seem surprised. He flicked ash. "My daddy used to fish there," he said. He said, "Don't fix what don't belong to you. Some folks go and rub their hands on it like it'll tell them something. It doesn't say a thing." He glanced at me again. "You can tell it's there even if you're not looking, though." I thought about the steady wash in my walls at night. I thought about the wet ring under the envelope and my porch step with the odd streaks and the hummingbird feeder that knocked against a window when there was no wind and the woman who went back inside instead of returning my wave. I thought about the fisherman who didn't look at me when he said the river didn't like it. I rubbed the back of my neck and my fingers came away damp in the heat. I said, "Do you know why it says that date?" He shrugged. 68, he said. Hurricanes, floods, men who go out when they shouldn't, men who stay when they should leave. Pick one. He stood up, dropped the cigarette butt into the can and walked off without hurry. I stood there another 10 minutes. The heron moved farther down. A kid threw a stick and a dog didn't fetch it. The stick turned once, twice, and sank. I stopped going out there. Doug didn't press me. Maya stopped joking in that way you stop when someone looks thinner around the eyes. Mrs. Langley brought me a pie one afternoon and didn't stay to talk, which is unlike her. I slept with noise. On podcasts about nothing, boring shows where people buy houses with big kitchens so I wouldn't hear the wash in the wall. It still came and I still heard it, because I knew when to listen. I started walking in the other direction when a street goes down toward the marsh. I didn't look at the river when I drove across the bridges. If there's a storm, I turn up the radio to drown the sound of the rain doing its river imitation. The prints sit in a shoebox in the back of a closet. I don't open it. I have thought about throwing it in the trash on pickup day so it's gone from my house without me making a big move by myself. I haven't done it. It feels like if I make a show of getting rid of them, I'm acknowledging something I've worked hard to treat as nothing. Sometimes I watch my neighbor's cat stare at the space under my porch steps and not move for a long while. Then it blinks and walks away. I make coffee and it tastes fine. I sweep grit from the floor that must come in on my shoes. I tell myself, what everyone tells themselves when the air is wet and the metal on your tongue feels like a coin. It's all normal. It's all the same. The numbers on a rock mean what you want them to mean. I still go outside. I still walk to the store for milk. I still water the plants. But when I pass a drainage ditch with a little bit of standing water in it, I don't look too long. When I hear a truck a few streets over and the sound roars and then softens in a way that reminds me of waves against a bank, I change the channel. My heart clips at odd moments. I get through them. I made a list in my head of places I won't go now. The big bridge over the river at sunset when people stop and take pictures. The fishing pier on Sunday mornings. The drag of sand where the kids play baseball and you can hear the water moving beyond the trees. It's a short list. I can avoid it. I can pretend it doesn't cut the city in half. When someone says the year 1968 in conversation for some other reason, a TV show, a birthday, I feel the smallest tug behind my ribs. I adjust my shirt. I nod like it doesn't land. I don't have a good story for what happened. I have photos that are wrong and nights where the house sounded like a shoreline. I have a sentence a man said in a plain voice. I have the way other people look at the water without looking at it, and then decide to look away. I stay away from the banks now. I cross bridges fast. I won't stand on a pier. I don't linger where the river feels like it can see you. I used to like the slow, steady sound it makes when boats are far away. Now, if I catch that sound in the hum of my fridge or in the breath that comes through old windows or in the space under a door, I go to the other room. I move around. I keep moving. The water seemed to wait for someone to stand too still. I spend most mornings in the yard behind Trent's auto, cutting cast iron brake drums and knocking copper out of old heaters. It's a small place by the rail spur, nothing fancy. You can smell the oil before you see the rust piles. That's the job. You learn to read weight with your hands and keep a blade straight even when the metal fights you. The work doesn't change whether it's summer or snow. I'm 29 and my back already complains like it's older. People ask why I do it and I tell them the truth. I'm good at it. And I like bringing home cash the same day. The quarry sits 3 miles outside town, past the farms and the auto wrecker with the big fiberglass gorilla on the roof. It's fenced, but the fence is old and sagging. The sign says closed, no trespassing. Everyone ignores it for one reason or another. Kids go there to drink. Guys like me go there because the old machinery sometimes gives up something worth cutting. The place has a dead smell, diesel and powdered limestone. In summer, the dust sticks to your tongue. When the wind swings right, you can hear trucks on the county road. But mostly it's quiet except for your own footfalls and the tight, high sound of small stones when you kick through them. I go out there every couple weeks. I bring a magnet on a rope, a pry bar, a Milwaukee saw with 2 charged batteries, and a cooler with a ham sandwich. Some days I find nothing but shreds of cable and beer cans with buckshot holes. Some days I score. 2 months back, I pulled a coil of copper thick as my wrist from behind an old compressor and made half my rent that same afternoon. Jake comes with me sometimes. He's the kind of friend who shows up late with coffee and a story that eats your morning. We grew up together. He runs a backhoe for his uncle, has old tickets in his glove box, and knows everyone in the county by their truck. The third person in this story is my sister, Lena. She calls me to remind me about things I already know. When our mother's birthday is, when I'm supposed to pay the gas bill, the usual. She doesn't like me going to the quarry alone. She says that place has bad edges. I tell her it's fine. You can see every direction for a long way. There's nothing there that wants anything from you. It was a Tuesday in late October when I found the thing. The weather still felt like fall hasn't made up its mind. Big sky, light wind, air that smelled like the inside of a bag of cement. The machinery is all sunk a little into the ground as if the site is slowly swallowing it. You step and your boot leaves a neat print and then it collapses in. Thin crust over powder. I had the place to myself. Even the birds kept their distance. I parked my pickup behind the loader shed so the road wouldn't see it. The gate had a new chain, which looked like the county was trying to look serious. Someone had already cut a different hole in the fence 20 yards down, so I went through there like always. I started at the top pad and worked my way toward the pit, checking the shadows where people stash things. The conveyor belts had rotted and drooped. The motor housings were still good cast aluminum. I got a few pounds off one with the saw and cooled the blade by dragging it in the dust. Same as always. The place does this thing where it seems quiet and then you notice a small steady sound, like grit sliding down tin, and you realize it's been going on the whole time. I ate my sandwich around 11 and sat on the hood. Wind pushed dust off the ledges and it drifted like smoke. I could smell leftover diesel from one of the buried tanks. There's a small pond down in the main pit, water the color of a new penny. Some days it glows under the sun like it's lit from inside. That day it looked flat and heavy. From where I was, I noticed a section near the pond where the ground looked wrong. It's hard to explain. The powder there had that smooth look you get after rain, but there was a raised patch off to one side that didn't match the wind lines. Not big. Maybe 5 feet long, 2 feet wide, like someone dragged a tarp and then laid a door over it. The tracks around it were soft and shallow. Not old tractor treads or ATV marks, just a mess and then nothing. You learn to pay attention to anything that doesn't look like it grew there. I slid down the slope and went over. The smell changed as I got lower. Cool, damp limestone and something else like hot metal that isn't hot anymore. My boots sank to the ankle. I stepped slow, heel first, testing. The raised patch was firm under the crust like there was a solid thing under a thin layer of powder. I kicked the edge and the top layer broke and slumped. The toe of my boot pinged on something. Not stone, not pipe. I dropped to one knee and scraped with the pry bar. Dust avalanched off and revealed a corner of sheet metal. Gray, sun-scuffed. I could see weld beads along the edge. They were clean, still bright when I brushed them with my glove. Whoever did them had a steady hand. No rust bleeding from the seam. I tapped that corner. The sound came back dull and tight, not ringing. Something enclosed. My first thought was toolbox. Guys stash tools out here so they can come back at night. I levered the pry bar under the edge and pulled. The bar flexed and the whole thing didn't want to move. I got a better angle, dug out along the side, and then enough dirt fell away that I could see the shape. If you've ever seen a child's casket, you know the outline. Short, squared at the head, tapered a little toward the foot. The metal was thin but solid, and the weld ran all the way around. I sat back and looked at it and tried to decide what I was looking at. It was small, not the length you want to see. That hit me later. Right then I was mostly thinking about what else it could be. Some kind of sample box, a home-built safe, a prank. The welds were new. No powder or soot on them. The metal around them had that heat discoloration rainbow if you tilted your head just right. There were fresh shovel marks in the powder, and a spot nearby where the surface had been watered, like someone dumped a bucket to hide their footprints. The edges of that spot were still damp, darker than the rest. I stood up and looked around the pit. There was no one. The fence at the rim wasn't moving. No dust trail on the service road. I told myself to call someone first. Then I told myself not to be dramatic because it could still be a safe, and maybe I was about to ruin someone else's stash and make a small set of enemies. The problem with finding things is that every find usually belongs to someone else who wants it more than you do. I texted Jake a picture, a gray corner, beads, a glove for scale. I wrote, "What am I looking at? Toolbox or casket?" He wrote back, "Where you at?" I wrote, "Quarry," and he wrote a long string of caution I could hear in his tone even through the screen. "Do not cut open a coffin in the quarry like a dumbass. I'm 20 minutes out." I told him I'd wait. I waited 10, then I prodded at the side again. I know, that's me. I pried the crust off the rest and cleared the lid. It was all one piece, no hinges showing, just the lid welded to the box. I found where the bead wobbled once, a spot that looked like someone had to stop and start again. And I put my finger there and it came away dark. Grease? No. There was a faint chemical smell like burnt flux. The wind shifted and I caught it stronger for a second. A burnt sweet note under the diesel stink. I heard something soft from inside the box. A shift, could have been settling powder, could have been the sound of my own boot scraping metal and echoing. I froze and listened. The quarry can play tricks with sound. You think it's behind you and it's the wind. You think it's above you and it's your own breath bouncing off the wall. I sat back and checked my phone. No bars. That happens down there. I walked halfway up the slope and got 1 bar and a text from Lena, asking about a ride for Saturday. I typed back, busy now, call later, and it sent. I went back down. The sun drifted behind a thin sheet of cloud and the pit turned from white to gray. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. I told myself I'd do nothing else until Jake showed. I stood there and watched dust slide off the lid and thought about how new those welds looked. The little breathy shifting sound came again. I swallowed. I said out loud, "That's settling. It's settling." My voice sounded small and the walls pushed it right back at me. I put my palm on the lid. Cool. I felt a faint vibration and I told myself it was just wind chatter, metal talking to itself. I held my palm there another 5 seconds and took it away. There was a clean print in the dust. I heard a truck up top and figured it was Jake, but then the engine went past on the county road. I looked at the fence line and saw a figure standing up there near the old gate just inside. Still, I raised a hand and squinted. It was a man in a brown jacket and a cap with a short bill. He had his arms crossed and didn't move when I waved. I waited. The figure stepped back and was gone. I didn't hear steps. No chain clinked. It was like he had been there and then wasn't. I told myself it was nothing. The fence cuts a weird silhouette against the sky. Jake pulled in 15 minutes later, horn tapping twice. He slid down the slope and saw what I'd dug out, and the first thing he said was a low Jesus. He walked around it in a careful circle, like if he stepped wrong it would break. He bent and flicked the weld with his finger. "This is new," he said. "Like last night new." He sniffed. "You smell that?" I nodded. We both went quiet. There's a kind of silence in places like that where you feel like you shouldn't say the thing you're thinking, because it will make it true. After a minute, he said, "We should call Pruitt. That's Sheriff Pruitt." I said, "Or we could put the powder back and pretend we didn't see it." Jake didn't laugh. He got his phone out and tried for a signal. Nothing down in the bowl. He trotted up just far enough to get a sliver of service and made the call. I heard him half the time talking over the wind. He said coffin twice and then he said no, not wood. He came back down. He's sending somebody. Told us not to touch anything. So that's what we did. We stood there and waited. It's funny what you notice when you have to stand still. Small clicks. Dust ticking against the lid. Little shift of the powder near my boot. The pond water made a soft sound I haven't heard anywhere else. A tired lap against rock that doesn't rise or fall with anything. One shadow across the lid was mine, one was Jake's, and sometimes the shadow of the wire fence shook on the ground even when the fence itself looked still. A cloud went over and the bottom of the pit got a little darker, like the whole thing exhaled. After a while, Jake said, "You hear that?" I said, "Which part?" He cocked his head. We both listened. There was a sound like a small tap from inside the box, not a knock, more like a fingernail catching on metal than sliding. I felt my scalp start to crawl. I looked at Jake and his face had gone blank. He swallowed and said, "Could be little rock settling. Pocket of air." I nodded and it felt like we were reading off the same script because neither of us wanted to be the first to say the worst thing out loud. Pruitt didn't come himself. A deputy truck arrived up top and 2 guys started down, slow and careful, like they'd practiced walking in powder.
One I knew from high school, Dan McCready. He's the type who used to throw rocks at stop signs to hear the sound.
The other was new to me, tall, thin, with the kind of haircut that looks like it was done by a rule. He looked like he slept bad. They took a look at the box, exchanged a glance, and then Dan said, "Well, hell." The tall one didn't say anything. He touched the lid with the back of his fingers and then drew his hand back.
"Warm?" I asked.
He shook his head. "No." Dan took out his radio and said a few words I couldn't hear over crackle. Then he put the radio on his belt and said to me, "You dig it up?" I said, "Just the top." It was like this, and I pointed at where the crust had slumped. He nodded. "You touched the seam?" I said, "I brushed it." He sighed like that added something he didn't want. The tall one walked a slow circle looking outward. Not at the box itself, but at the ground. He checked the shovel marks. He looked at the place where the powder had been watered. He looked up the slope and squinted at the fence line, like he could see whoever had done this standing there watching. If he saw someone, he didn't say they didn't open it there. Not that day. That's probably the part that hangs in my head the most. Dan took a few photos. The tall one scraped at the weld with a pocket knife and then put the blade to his nose and sniffed. Dan said, "We're going to call this in." He said it like he was reading it off cards. The tall one said, "Quiet. We should cover it back." Dan looked at him like he'd said a bad word. "We're not touching it." The tall one didn't argue, but I saw the way he clocked me and Jake, like we'd seen a thing we weren't supposed to see. We waited another half hour. No one else came. The wind died and the pit went still. The powder stopped whispering. The pond went glassy. That tapping sound, faint as a moth, came again 3 times, spaced out. Dan flinched, then acted like he hadn't. He chewed his lip. He said, "Let's go." The tall one hesitated, then he nodded. Dan looked at me and said, "We'll take it from here." I said, "You're leaving it?" He said, "We have to get equipment." The tall one said a little too fast, "We'll put a car on the gate." I said, "Okay." I wanted to ask them to stay. I wanted to call Lena. Instead, I said nothing and followed Jake up the slope. On the way out, I saw the man in the brown jacket again, far off by the loader shed. He had his head bent like he was reading something in his hands. When he looked up, the angle of his cap shadowed his face. I waved. He didn't wave back. When I took my next step, he wasn't there. There's a corner of the shed where a person can tuck in and vanish. Maybe that's what he did. Jake didn't see him. We went to the diner because that's what you do when you don't know what to do next. Eggs, coffee, a long seat near the back where the AC rattles. The waitress asked about the quarry like she asks about everything. I said, "Nothing good out there." Jake said, "Nothing at all." And we both tried not to look at each other. The TV by the register played the weather with the sound off. A man coughed behind us 3 times like he had to reset his throat. I tried to call Lena again. Straight to voicemail. I left one of those weird stilted messages where you don't say the real thing, but you say enough words that you feel like you've done something. Jake got a text from Dan. "We're on it. Don't go back." He showed me the screen with a shrug. "Like I was going to," he said, but his foot was jiggling under the table. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the weld line. You know how your eyes keep moving under your lids and make patterns? Mine kept drawing beads, little loops of metal all the way around. And under that, a place you can't see. My apartment is over a garage, thin walls, you can hear the guy downstairs when he flushes. The fridge kicked on and I sat up like it had said my name. I cracked the window. Night air, smell of leaves. The freight train whistle from 2 towns over. I watched the dark like I was waiting for it to blink. The next morning I called the sheriff's office because I wanted to know what they'd done. The woman on the phone said someone would call me back. No one did. Jake got through to Dan around noon and came by the yard to tell me that they had eyes on the gate, but they hadn't pulled the box. He wouldn't say more. He wouldn't look at me when he said it. "Not our problem now," he said, and he tried to sound like he believed it. 2 days went by. My work started to feel like a sound played in a room you're not in. I found myself dragging the blade through cuts for too long, burning it. The magnet clanged against a drum and made my chest jump. I told myself to keep my head down. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the tap. On Friday, I saw the brown jacket man again. I was leaving the grocery with a bag under my arm, and he was across the street by the feed store. He had that same still way about him. When the traffic thinned, I stepped off the curb to cross and talk to him. Ask him if he'd been at the quarry, ask him if he'd seen anything. A pickup rolled by slow, and when it cleared, the man was gone. The only thing near where he'd stood was the bulletin board with the Lost Dog flyers and a half-torn poster for a church dinner. That night I dreamed I was back in the pit and it was raining. The powder turned to paste and started to flow. The box floated a little and I put my hands on it to steady it and water went up my sleeves. I woke with my arm hair standing up and a taste in my mouth like I'd licked a battery. Saturday morning, Lena showed up at my place unannounced because that's how she gets me to answer. She saw my face and said, "You look sick," and I said, "I'm fine," and she didn't believe me. She asked what was wrong and I told her the story from the start. I watched her go from annoyance to concern to that look where your eyes want to make what you're hearing into a reasonable shape, and they can't. She said, "You called the sheriff?" I said, "They were there twice." She said, "So it's done." I said, "They didn't open it." She asked why not. I said I didn't know. She looked at me then in a way that made me feel like she'd seen a crack open in me and was trying to decide how bad it was. "Don't go back there," she said. "Promise." I said, "Okay." I didn't go that day. I didn't go Sunday either. Monday morning, though, after the yard closed, I drove out. It felt like when you touch a sore tooth with your tongue, even though you know you shouldn't. The gate had a county chain on it now, bright and heavy. 2 locks doubled through each other. There was a deputy car parked in the turnout, empty. I pulled into the trees on the other side and walked the fence to the hole down by the berm. The hole had fresh wire twisted through it, like a quick repair by someone who didn't want to waste a whole panel. I had wire cutters in my pocket because I'd told myself I was just going to test the fix. I snipped 2 twists and then I stopped and stood still because I realized I could smell hot metal again. It was faint, like the memory of a smell, but it was there. A breeze pushed thin dust through the grass and it carried that note. I could also smell rain even though the sky was clear. The deputy car door opened behind me. I turned. It was the tall one from earlier. He stepped out slow like his bones hurt. He looked thinner than before. He said, "You going back in there?" I put the cutters in my pocket. "No," I said. He studied my face to see if I was lying. Then he was quiet for a long beat, and after that he said something I think he hadn't meant to. He said, "We don't dig in that pit." He said it soft like he was practicing telling it to himself. Then louder he said, "You need to go home." I said, "What's in the box?" He looked at the fence. "You don't want to know," he said. And then, because that sounded like the kind of thing a bad movie cop says, he added, "It's not my call." His jaw clenched. He looked like he hadn't slept in days and he was mad at himself for it. I said, "You didn't open it." He said nothing. I asked, "Did someone tell you not to?" He looked at the chain. Then he said, almost to the chain, "We don't dig in that pit." The words were the same, but this time they felt like something he'd been given to repeat. It didn't make sense. It still doesn't. What rule is that? Every place has rules, sure. Sometimes it's just money and politics and you don't poke where you shouldn't. But this was a dead quarry in a county that can't afford new road salt. It didn't feel like money. It felt like something else. I went home. I sat on my steps and tried to make the feeling go away. When I closed my eyes, the lid was there, the weld beads bright, the sense of a small sound right at the edge of hearing. Tap, pause, slide. I turned the TV up. It didn't help. Lena called and I lied through my teeth and said I felt better. Later I heard someone out by the dumpsters. I got up to look and there was nobody there. Just the lid on one bin swung open like it wanted to say something. Then it shut itself with a soft whump. I stood with my hand on the window frame and told myself to grow up. In the days after that, the quarry started showing up in the background of everything. The man in the brown jacket stood on the far edge of the grocery lot 3 more times, always where you'd have to cross at least 1 lane to get to him. At the yard, a sheet of corrugated the size of my body fell forward off a stack even though I hadn't touched it. It landed so close that the breeze on its way down moved the hairs on my arm. The edge line on that sheet looked like a long, thin weld, and the pattern made my stomach twist. At night, a truck idled on the road outside my apartment and then drove away when I went to the window. When I lay down, the fridge cut in and then clicked again, and I counted the space between the clicks like that would help. I asked around. Not like a reporter, just the way you talk at the counter when you're buying bolts. People knew the quarry. They had stories about fights there, parties, a kid who broke his ankle on the ledge and had to be helicoptered out. No one said anything about a box, but one old guy, Earl, who used to drive the loader, gave me a little flat look and said, "That place takes more than it gives." He said it just like that. Not a warning. Not a joke. I asked what he meant. He shrugged and said, "You know how some spots hold sounds? That pit holds other things." Jake stopped by less and less. He didn't want to talk about it. If I brought it up, he changed the subject. Once I pushed and he said, sharper than I'd ever heard him, "Drop it, Tim." Then he softened and looked sorry. "I'm not joking," he said. "I keep hearing it too. Just drop it." He rubbed his ring finger with his thumb like something hurt. We looked at each other and didn't say what we were both thinking, which was that we were hearing the same sound in different rooms. A week later, I drove out to the county line to look at a lead on some restaurant equipment. On the way back, I took the long route that goes past the quarry. I told myself I wasn't going to stop. The chain on the gate had a different lock on it now, something industrial. The deputy car wasn't there. Someone had fixed the hole in the fence with a new panel. I parked anyway. The air had that dead heat you get before a storm. The sky was flat like an old TV screen. I stood by the fence and listened. From down in the pit, I heard a metal noise. It wasn't the tap. It was bigger. The sound you get when you drag a shovel along something solid. It came up the slope in a slow scrape. Then it stopped. Then another scrape. I tasted metal and dust at the same time, like chewing on foil. I put my hands on the fence and the fence hummed. That could have been my hands. I know that. But it felt like a current running through. I thought about the man in the brown jacket. I thought about how he never got closer than the distance you can almost cross before the light changes. I backed up and put the truck in gear and turned around and went home. That night I packed a bag. I took clothes, paperwork, a jar with the money I kept under the sink. I told Trent I needed time, and he said I always need time, and I said he could keep my whole pile of rotors out back if he wanted. He didn't ask why. I think he knew I'd say something he didn't want to hear. I moved 2 counties over, to a place where the air smells like corn and the only pit is a drainage ditch. I took a job in a different yard, same rust, different stories. I don't go near the old places. I don't go near that part of the county. If I pass a chain link fence by chance, I don't look through it. The man in the brown jacket hasn't shown himself, but I still see him when I check a window and catch my reflection. Night is quieter here, which doesn't help. Quiet is when I hear it best. I told Lena I moved because the rent was cheaper.
She doesn't believe me.
I told Jake I moved because I wanted to be closer to a girl I used to know. He said nothing, and then he said he'd stop by sometime, and then he didn't. The first night in my new place, the water heater made a sound like a knuckle on steel. I sat up and counted my breaths. I told myself I'd stop thinking about it. I tried to think about anything else. The sound kept happening, spaced out just enough to keep you waiting. If you've ever sat and held your breath to see if you can hear a thing, you know the feeling. Your lungs go tight and time pulls long. I know how this all sounds. It sounds like I'm a guy who found something he couldn't place and he filled the hole with stories. You could go to that quarry right now and maybe the box isn't there. Maybe they took it out the day after and I didn't hear about it. Maybe the weld line in my head is just a loop I can't get out of. Maybe I made the man in the brown jacket out of nothing. The way you make faces out of knots in wood. That's possible. I want to believe that. But I can tell you the order of things easy and clear. I can tell you the smell. Burnt flux. Vom diesel. Limestone dust. I can tell you the sound, which is soft and patient and not the same as anything I've heard before. And I can tell you exactly what the sheriff's man said, in a voice like he was borrowing it from someone else. He said, "We don't dig in that pit." He meant it. That wasn't a suggestion. Some mornings now before I go to work, I sit on the edge of my bed and stare at the screws on the outlet cover. I look at the seam where the plastic meets the wall. I catch myself checking the welds on anything I pass. I know the feeling of a new bead, how it looks clean and proud of itself. I notice them everywhere, on dumpsters, on stair rails, on the back of a street sign that someone patched years ago. The line sits there like a closed mouth. I walk away when I can. The truth is, walking away and staying away are different skills. I'm learning the second one a day at a time. Some nights I dream that the powder shifts. Some mornings I wake with the taste of metal heavy on my tongue, like I've been breathing through a pipe. Maybe that's just the heater. Maybe that's what houses sound like when you're listening for something else. I work, I keep my back straight. I let the sparks fall how they want. If a cut goes wrong, I break and start again. I tell myself stories that begin and end in the daylight. It helps I haven't gone back. I won't. It's not that I'm scared of what's in the ground. It's that I'm scared of the way people have decided not to look. That's harder. You can argue with a sound. You can't argue with the face someone makes when they choose to not see what's in front of them. Jake texted last week. "Hear from you lately?" I didn't answer. Lena called yesterday to tell me about a church sale, and I let it ring out, and then I called her back from the hardware store parking lot because I didn't want to be in my apartment. The wind blew a plastic bag across the asphalt and it made a dry, dragging sound. For a second I thought it was coming from under my truck. I crouched and looked. It was just a bag. I laughed out loud. It didn't help. I've started wearing earplugs at night sometimes. They make the inside of my head louder. You can hear your own blood? You can hear your breath click in your throat. They don't keep it out, whatever it is. They just make it easier to pretend. I'll take that. I'm telling you all this because there's no good border between knowing and not knowing once you open yourself to either. The quarry sits a few miles from people who sleep with their windows cracked to get the night air. It's quiet there most days. Sometimes a kid sneaks in and throws rocks in the pond and they make good round ripples, and then the ripples stop and the water is flat again. The gate chain is shiny now. The fence has a new panel. The signs look fresh. And if you stand by the fence at dusk and hold your breath and lean your ear toward the wind, maybe all you hear is your own heart. Maybe that's enough to make you step back. I moved counties, but I didn't fix anything. I just got further from a hole in the ground. When I pass a welder on a job site now, I keep walking and I keep my eyes down. When I carry a piece of angle iron that's been capped with a nice clean seam, I do it like it might shift in my hands. And this is the last thing I'll say. It's not a warning. It's a description. It's the only way I can explain why I won't go back or ask any more questions, or pretend that it was all settled when the deputy said it would be. Every welded seam looks like something trying not to get out. I still drive out to Vaughan once a month for groceries and to keep the pickup from getting soft. If you go south from Santa Rosa, take 54, you know the stretch. Flat, low brush, long, straight runs where the road looks like a tape measure pulled tight to the horizon. Day heat sits on your arms even through the glass. The smell is dry dirt and warm plastic. Some days there's a hum in the telephone lines that rides next to you like a second engine. I don't push it hard. 65, maybe 70. I'm 62. I'm not in any hurry, not since I handed in my last logs. Linda tells me to go in the morning and be back by lunch. She doesn't like me stopping on the shoulders out there. We've been married 38 years and I still do what she asks mostly. But I keep water in the truck and a good jack and I tell her not to worry. She worries anyway. The afternoon before this started, she tapped the weather on her phone and said, "Wind's going to pick up. Be back early." I said sure and meant it. There's a little pullout past mile marker 202 where folks leave flowers for a girl who got hit back in 2013. Her name was Serafina. A drunk teenage boy clipped her on a Sunday. I wasn't the one who found her. I just heard it on the radio at the time and then saw the troopers later. For months after, people left balloons and ribbons that faded to gray. It turned into the usual. One weathered cross, a couple solar lights that don't work, a plastic vase that's been out there so long it's gone cloudy. It's part of the landscape now. If I'm not in a talky mood, I pull over there to stretch my back because it's flat and nobody bothers you. First time I noticed the second cross was in June. It was new wood, pale and sharp where it had been cut, set about 40 feet from Serafina's toward the ditch. No name on it. A yellow silk rose tied by the intersection of the beams. Clean. Maybe someone else crashed there and I missed it. It happens. The county posts accident reports online, but I don't keep up. I parked anyway, shut the engine off. The silence was heavy and warm, the way it gets when the wind hasn't made up its mind. The wires buzzed a steady note. You feel it in your fillings more than you hear it. Grasshoppers clicked around in the weeds. I took a drink of water and walked over. Serafina's cross had dust on the plaque, but you could still feel the letters with your finger. Someone had put fresh carnations in the old vase, pink ones. They were real, not silk. The water had that sweet rot smell. I looked over at the new cross. The silk rose was tied neat, a little off-center. There was a stone at the base, smooth and flat, like from a river and not the desert. I told myself somebody's cousin had been out there with a truck bed full of decorative rock and misplaced one. I went back to the pickup when a gust ran its fingers over the brush and it made that soft rubbing sound like hands drying after washing. It gave the wires a higher pitch for a second. I felt watched. Not by a person. More like when you realize you've been talking out loud and someone heard. That little embarrassment flinch even though nobody's around. I shook it off. Heat plays with your head. Next week I stopped again. I don't know why I made a point of it. Habit is its own road. The second cross had 3 white daisies tied to it instead of the yellow rose. Same knot. Serafina's side looked untouched. The vase still had the pink ones in muddy water, but they'd sagged. You know how flowers curl when they're tired. I didn't see any footprints, but it's hard to tell with ground like that. Just crust and dust. I watched the horizon. No cars, insects doing their slow circuits. The sun had that plate on a stick glare and the heat clicked in the engine as it cooled. I had a cracker, felt silly standing there and said, "Quiet." All right then. That was for no one in particular. Maybe for whoever had put the daisies. When I got home, Linda asked if I'd been drinking enough water. She touched my forearm like my skin could tell her. I told her about the new cross. She said, "Was there a wreck?" I said I didn't think so. "Maybe they finally marked that poor boy," she said. "Which boy?" "The one from that night," she said. You know, she meant something else, a different memory. "No," I said. "There was just Serafina. The teens were in a Camaro. Only she died." Linda looked at me like she was rewinding a tape in her head and checking the counter. I remember too. We let it go and ate dinner. People put up crosses for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes not even for a death right there. Memorials are portable. Grief goes where it wants. That was my first explanation. The second came 2 weeks later when I realized the flowers were changing every day. I'm not out there daily, but I drive early, like Linda asks. And one morning there were sunflowers tied with twine. They looked too big for the cross and it leaned a little under the weight. I tightened the twine and straightened it out. Next time, 5 days after, the cross had been brushed clean. Sand piled to one side in a little line from where someone had wiped the base with their hand. The flowers were a single stem of baby's breath. No twine, tucked in neat. It was pretty in a modest way. Nobody on the highway. No footprints again. And the thing was, Serafina's remained as it always did. The carnation's brown now. Flies tapping the surface of the water. The new cross kept itself tidy. I told Dale about it. He was my driving partner before I retired. We'd run Phoenix to Amarillo and back too many times. He still takes loads part-time. We were at the diner in Santa Rosa. He ordered chicken fried steak and then said he was trying to watch his cholesterol. He laughs at his own lies. I told him about the flowers changing. He said, "So someone's visiting." I said I hadn't seen a soul. He dipped a fry in gravy and said, "Not hard to go at night. People have to work. Maybe it's a mom. They're quiet that way." We both watched the waitress refill coffee. Behind the counter, the little TV had one of those shows where a judge yells at people. "You want me to go out there with you?" He said. I said no. I wasn't scared. It just stuck with me. If you drive a long time, you start to notice when something doesn't fit. It rubs. On a Sunday, Linda came along. She likes Vaughn for the green chili cheese bread at the bakery. We stopped at the pullout because I wanted to show her. She had on those big sunglasses that make a person look like a bug. "It's just wood," she said. "You and your little projects." But she came with me to a few steps from the new cross and then she stopped. Like when you expect a step that isn't there. "Hang on," she said and put a hand out to my arm. The sun had me squinting and I thought she'd stumbled. "What?" I asked. She shook her head. "It feels like being in someone else's house when they're asleep." Her voice was small. I said, "We're on a highway shoulder." She let go. The flower was a marigold that day, 3 of them. The smell was sharp and oily, more than I expected in that dry air. Linda didn't like it. She backed up and looked at Serafina's cross instead. "Somebody should change this water," she said. We didn't touch it. That night at home, the wind came up the way she'd said it would. It hissed in the corners of the house and tapped the aluminum edging of the roof. I lay there and counted the gaps between the taps. You know how your breath gets shallow when you do that, until you have to sit up and take a real one. The digital clock showed 1:13. I got up, drank from the kitchen faucet, looked out at the yard. Our neighbor's motion light clicked on for nothing. The yard was empty, but the air looked thick, like heat still had its hands on it even though the temp had dropped. When I went back to bed, I almost asked if she really meant she remembered 2 crosses there. From before, I didn't. I know how memory gets flexible. We've had years where it stretched a lot. The next week I stopped again, not for any reason. I saw the pullout and the steering wheel felt like it turned on its own. The wires sang their one note. The truck ticked. Serafina's vase was knocked over, and the muddy water had made a dark tongue in the dust. No footprints. Her cross leaned a little more than usual. I knelt and set the vase upright. The mouth of the ditch felt bigger than it should have. A little cooler down there even with all that heat. It smelled like damp cardboard for a second and then nothing. The new cross had no flower. Instead, someone had propped a strip of a magazine against the base. It was a photograph of a road, but the perspective was wrong. Too low maybe from the angle. Like a dog's view if it sat at the center line and watched the lines come toward it. The edges of the strip were even like someone had cut it neat. There was a thumbprint near the bottom, pale from dust. I don't know why I put it in my pocket. Habit again. Truckers collect little things. Keychains, postcards, matchbooks. Things to hold when you're bored waiting on a dock. At the gas station in Vaughan, I showed the strip to the cashier, a kid with a beard that hadn't quite committed. He said that's artistic, like he was practicing a word. I said, you seen anyone putting flowers up at 202? He said, those shrines are everywhere, man. My aunt does one off 60. She says the dead get thirsty. He smiled like he knew it was weird and didn't know what else to do with it. I bought a bottle of water even though I had some in the truck. I drove home and didn't tell Linda about the photograph. It sat on my dresser under my wallet, and sometimes I'd tap it to feel the paper. A few days later, Dale called and said, I'm taking a load near you. Leave at dawn tomorrow, coffee? He always says dawn like he invented it. We met at the lot behind the truck wash. It was still pale and weak out, the kind of early that doesn't have its face on yet. We drove 2 vehicles toward Vaughan, and I flashed my lights to make him pull over when we were near the crosses. He gave me a look like, really? But he pulled in behind me. He stood with his hands in his back pockets and looked around. The sun had just cracked the line and threw long shadows of us onto the brush. He said, okay, I'm creeped out. He doesn't spook. The new cross had lilies tied to it with the same twine, but the twine was wet like it had been in water. There were tiny dots darkening the dirt under it, the way water makes spots and then shrinks until they're gone. Dale leaned in and sniffed. Smells like a funeral, he said, and then laughed like he couldn't help it. He was trying to make it normal. The lilies were turned a little so they faced the road, and the faces of the flowers seemed to lean in the direction traffic would come from. Serafina's was unchanged. Her vase was dry again. No more mud. Someone had set a little angel figurine there. It had the face rubbed off from sun. A semi blew by without giving us space. The vacuum pulled my shirt a little. After it passed, the wires settled back to their note. Dale squinted at the ditch. You see that? He said, see what? He took 2 steps down the incline and then stopped. Nah, he said. Nothing. My eyes played me. He came back up. You should stop stopping here. He looked at me. He meant it, I know, I said. I put my hand on the new cross, I don't know why, and it was warm the way wood is when it's been sun for hours. But it was still early. The sun had only been up maybe 20 minutes. My skin prickled. I drew my hand back and we left. That afternoon, a state trooper knocked on our door. His hat was tucked under his arm. Young guy. Broad in the face the way some kids from the eastern part of the state are. He said, Mr. Reeves? He pronounced it like Reeves, which is how people read it the first time. I said Reeves like leaves. He smiled and said sorry. He asked if I'd been pulled off near mile marker 202 that morning. I said yes. He asked if I'd moved anything. I said no. He looked over at the living room like he wanted to set his hat down but didn't see anywhere that felt right. Linda was in the kitchen pretending to rinse something. He said, we had a report of people stopping there, taking pictures, doing who knows. Folks get weird ideas about these shrines. He didn't say who reported it. I said we were just paying respects. He nodded like that was the answer he wanted. Then he looked at me a second longer and said, you remember a second cross there before this week? I noticed it in June, I said. He pressed his lips like he was thinking if he should say more. He said, Mother's only been one fatal at that spot. I said yes, Serafina, and gave him her last name. He nodded, almost grateful I knew. We get calls about another cross showing up there every couple years, he said. We go look. Sometimes there's a stick in the ground, sometimes nothing. He adjusted his hat under his arm. If you see anyone messing with it, call. Not because of the shrine. Because people will stop and they'll get hit. He thanked me and left. His cruiser sat in the dust a second and then rolled away, and the dust cloud hung like a curtain in our street. Linda said, well, that evening I took the photograph strip out of the dresser and looked at it under the lamp. I thought maybe I'd call the number on the back of the trooper's card. I held the picture at arm's length. It looked different from that distance. The center line was thick, closer than it should be if the camera was dead center. It looked like whoever took it was a half step into the lane, but there was no blur, like no car had come. I set it down and went out to the porch. It was still warm enough to sit without a jacket. The neighbor's dog licked at itself slow and steady and then froze with its head up. You know that dog look when they hear something you don't. Its ears moved a little. Our motion light clicked on like it wanted to help. There wasn't any wind. The telephone wire on the pole out by the alley had a tiny tremble in it anyway. I could feel it through my teeth the way you feel a truck idling next to you. I told myself I was making something out of nothing. This is how brains entertain themselves on long stretches. Any driver will tell you how your mind fills hours with old tunes and math and pictures. You have to give it something or it goes and finds its own, and then you think you saw a deer that isn't there. 2 mornings later, I left before dawn and parked at the pullout without even planning to. Habit had turned to compulsion in that quiet way. The sky was the kind of pale that looks like when you pour milk into water. The wires weren't humming yet. It was cool. I heard a train somewhere far off, a low wash like someone exhaling. I walked to the new cross and a fresh arrangement was there. Bluebells, little bells that looked delicate for this place, not native. The knot was the same as all the others. The cross was pushed maybe half an inch deeper into the dirt, like whoever visited had leaned on it. The ground had an impression next to it, not a footprint you could identify, just a smoothness like a knee had been there. I stood and listened. Every noise had a place, a sparrow chittering and then not, a car somewhere far south that never showed up on my stretch, then old air moving in the culvert under the road, a hollow mouth breath. I told myself out loud, "You're fine." My voice felt dumb in my mouth. That's when I felt the watching. It wasn't eyes on my back. It was in front of me across the road, low. The same feel as when a cat watches you from under a bed. Just the idea of it more than the sight. The brush there was flat and even, nothing taller than my knee. Shadows were shallow because the sun wasn't up high yet. I stared and my eyes watered because I didn't blink. Nothing moved. Still, my skin crawled the way it does when a fly lands on your neck and you don't want to slap yourself in public. I swallowed and the click in my throat sounded too loud. Then a white pickup slowed. The driver craned his head like people do, and I thought of what the trooper said. I stepped back so he'd know I wasn't going to walk into the lane. He sped up a little and went on. I exhaled. I told myself the watching was my own reflection in the chrome of my bumper behind me. Just some trick. I went back to the truck. The engine started right away. I drove to Vaughan and tried to shake it off. I didn't stop on the way back. For a week I stayed off 54 altogether and took the longer loop through Klein's Corners. It cost me time and gas for no good reason, and Linda rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. The house had a quiet to it during those days. Between the fridge clicks and the occasional door pop from the heat, there wasn't much. Linda did a puzzle at the table. I did crosswords and scratched at a spot on my forearm where nothing itched. At night, the hum in the lines came back and I found myself counting it the way I'd counted taps. I'd fall asleep mid-count and wake with my mouth dry. Then groceries ran low. It's funny what makes you brave. Not principles, milk. I told Linda I was going early and would be back by 10. She kissed my cheek and said, "I know you are." And I believed I would too. It was cooler that morning, a thin layer of clouds, the kind that make the sun a circle without the glare. I told myself I'd roll past the pullout without stopping. I kept my eyes forward. The wires were quiet, like someone had turned off a machine in another room. My hand sat light on the wheel. As I came even with the spot, I realized something that made me lift my foot. Seraphina's cross was there. The new cross was not, I braked. I pulled into the shoulder with that bump of tires on the rumble strip that shivers up your spine. I cut the engine. Silence. The air smelled like hot coin metal even though it wasn't hot yet. I looked around for disturbed ground. There should have been a shallow hole where the new cross had been. Nothing. Just hard pan with some grass like wire coming through. The bluebells from the other day, if there had been any left, were gone too, of course. Seraphina's side had a new arrangement. Someone had moved the angel and put fresh water in the vase. It was almost too much kindness all at once. I felt stupid standing there, a man staring at dirt as if it would tell him a story. The sense of being watched was softer but still there. Further away now, low and long. It was like whatever had been near had taken a step back. I went to the truck and started it. That's when the trooper pulled in behind me. He came up on my passenger side and I rolled the window down. It was the same young one. "Morning," he said. He looked like he hadn't slept. His eyes had that thin red line at the bottom. He said, "You been out here lately?" It wasn't accusatory. More like he'd already decided we were allies and didn't want to ruin it. I drove by, I said. He tapped the door frame with one finger. He had short nails clean. "I noticed things like that. We got a call last night," he said. "Someone wandering near the road. No car when I got here, nobody, but I saw lights way off." He pointed south but not directly. He pointed almost like he wanted to point at the ground and thought better of it at the last second. I didn't find anything. This spot makes people call. He paused and looked past me at the ditch like he was acting out the look because it was part of his job. Then he said the thing that put a knot in my throat. His voice went slower, careful, flat. That one's not for the dead. It's for the one who watches the road. He looked at me. I looked at him. There wasn't much else to say that wouldn't sound like an invitation. He straightened like he'd said too much and patted the top of the window frame. That friendly cop gesture they teach them. "Drive safe," he said. He walked back to his cruiser. The dust the tires made was fine as flour. It floated, and I could see the little swirls in it where the morning air tugged. I sat there a minute, engine running, then pulled out. I didn't stop at Vaughn. I went right through and drove until the feeling rolled off me like a sweater I didn't need. When I got home, Linda was at the sink again. She turned and looked at my face and didn't ask anything. She set a glass of water in front of me and we sat quiet a while. The clock ticked louder than it had the day before. A fly tapped at the window with its little dry clicks. That night I took the photograph strip out of the dresser and put it on the kitchen table. Linda came by and said, "What's that?" I told her where I'd found it. She picked it up, squinted. "I don't like it," she said, and set it face down. I left it that way. A week went by. I told myself nothing had happened. Sometimes the best thing is to starve a thought and it'll stop making noise. I took 54 again for a short run because it was dumb to drive extra miles to avoid my own imagination. Daylight mid-morning. The wind had the wires going a little. The spot came up. Serafina's cross stood there with a ribbon that flashed a little in the light. The other place, the one I knew by now even without a marker, sat empty and plain. But the feeling of being watched hit me so hard my foot lifted off the accelerator. It wasn't behind me or across the road. It sat in the passenger seat like fog I could feel but not see. I kept my eyes on the line. My breaths came shorter. There was no reason for it, and that made it worse. I ran my hand along the seam of the seat like I could check there for a change in texture. Anything to bring the feeling back down to ground. At home that afternoon, the phone rang. It was Dale. "You watching the news?" he said. "No," I said. He told me a truck went off near mile marker 199 in the dark. The driver fell asleep, they said. He hit the ditch and rolled. He was alive but messed up. I thought of the direction of the lilies, how they'd face the road. I told Dale I was fine and thanked him, and we talked about football like that could erase the last 5 minutes. That night when the wires hummed, I tried to listen past it for other small sounds. How the hallway carries a foot drag. How the fridge hum changes right before the compressor clicks out. I lay on my side and watched the bit of light under the bedroom door from the hall nightlight. It looked like the crack under a truck trailer when you back up at night. You trust the lines painted on the concrete to tell you when to stop. Even when your body is screaming that you're going to crunch steel. I know that feeling. You keep going slow and steady, because there's no other way to do it. The crack of light looked like that line. I must have slept because I woke to Linda getting up. She stopped in the doorway, hand on the jamb. "You hear that?" she whispered. I held my breath so I could hear better. Distant low, the sound of tires on highway, a constant brush. It was there even though we live a mile off the main road. Maybe the wind was right. Maybe night carries. Or maybe we were primed to hear it, like when you say a word over and over until it sounds wrong. "We should sell," she said, then laughed at herself. "I'm being silly." "For once," I said, and she smiled and went to the kitchen. In the morning, I taped the photograph strip to the inside of the glove box so I wouldn't have to look at it unless I chose to. Then I chose not to. I told Linda I'd start leaving earlier and being home by 9. She said, "Good." I called Dale and told him the same, and he said, "You're turning into a morning guy, Grandma," and I said, "Laugh it up." A month has passed. I don't stop at that pullout. I don't need to. The truck doesn't miss it. But if I go past it, and sometimes I do, because fear turns everything into a map, you better believe. My eyes stay on the center line, and my hands are steady, and I give the wires in the ditch, and the empty spot the same respect you give a loaded trailer for a guy you don't know. If I'm out after dinner and the road is quiet and the dash lights feel too bright and the darkness presses even with the high beams on, I listen to my breathing and I keep moving. I don't look in the side mirror longer than I have to. I don't look down into the ditch as I pass. If I see flowers in my peripheral, well, somebody's keeping busy. If I don't, that's fine too. I haven't seen the young trooper again, but once in town I saw his car at the diner. I walked in and didn't spot him. I drank coffee to kill time and left a little earlier than I needed to. When I stood by my pickup before getting in, the wires over the street were quiet, dead quiet, and I felt that same aware feeling, soft as breath on my ear, and I opened the door and got in and went home. I told Linda, "We're getting old." She said, "Speak for yourself." And we sat on the couch and watched a show where people fix houses and everything turns out fine in exactly 42 minutes. It helped for the time it lasted. I'm not going to say what it was at that spot. I'm not even going to say it was anything at all. I know how stories grow legs. I don't want this one running around without me. But I'll tell you this, in all my years on the road, there are stretches that feel like they belong to the land and stretches that feel like they belong to us. And then there are a few, not many, that feel like they belong to something that is fine with us being there until it isn't. And every now and then the line shifts under your tires and you don't know why. You just feel it. The heat and the emptiness and the low sound in your teeth, and you keep going because what else do you do? I don't drive at night anymore. Not even to Santa Rosa for a movie if Linda wants to catch one. We watch at home. She says it's because my eyes aren't what they were. I let her have that. It's a clean reason. I go to Vaughn for bread at sunup. I take my water and I don't stop where the brush is low and the view is flat and the wires sing their one note. There's a lot of road left and I'm not done with it. But I've learned you don't have to take every mile just because it's there. If you ask me why, I could tell you 100 trucker stories that would sound better. They'd have deer and black ice and late deliveries and dispatchers who forgot you existed. But this is the one I think about when I see a fresh bouquet tied square and neat knot, facing the lane as if to watch. Some things wait for tired drivers. I don't usually book spring jobs in Louisiana because of the storms, but a magazine wanted warm water wildlife, and their editor said, "You're good in heat, right?" I said yes, even though I'm 50 and my patience for sweating through shirts is thin. I packed the long lens, the waders, 2 pairs of socks I'd probably never keep dry, and rented a small camp on pilings at the edge of a floodplain south of Lafayette. The listing said it had a reliable window unit and a porch with a view. The photos showed a sloping lawn that wasn't a lawn at all, just grass that tolerated water. You could see the dark marks on the posts where the river had come up, then gone back down like a tide with a grudge. I drove in under a sky that looked undecided. Frogs were already yelling. You know how city noise blends into one hum? Down here it's frogs, insects, and a slow breathing sound from the cypress knees when the wind drags across them. The air was heavy with that wet rot smell you only get where wood never really dries. The camp was plain. A square box, tin roof, 2 rooms, a screened porch with a slanted floor. Someone had left a broom by the door. The screen door latch stuck and squealed. The window unit clicked on and off in a pattern that made it sound like it was listening before it decided to work again. I had 3 days to get shots of frogs, turtles, anything with eyes above water, and a story that wasn't all teeth. Day 1 was for scouting. I checked in with a bait shop for directions and a paper map. The woman behind the counter was late 60s, stiff hair, bright shirt. Her name tag said Aline. I asked if there was any spot dry enough to set up a tripod without sinking to my knees. She smirked at my boots and said, "Tripod in the marsh? You must be from away." I bought crickets I didn't need and a cold bottle of water and asked again, gentler. She pointed with her chin toward a blacktop that turned to dirt. "Follow it to the end. You'll find a cut. Stay on the higher side of the levee. Don't cross into anybody's lease." "What about the weather?" I said. "The forecast keeps changing." "It's spring," she said. "It's always changing." There was a man by the minnow tanks, thin with a face like a shovel. He was checking a string of trotline hooks for burrs, thumb rubbing each barb, quiet like he was praying. He glanced at me when I asked about the weather and then looked back at the line. Later I realized I never saw him blink. I drove out anyway. The dirt road narrowed into a 2-track and then gave up, so I parked and walked. It was the usual mess. Cypress knees like broken candles, slick mud that didn't know what it was, vines trying to shake your hat off. I moved slow because that's how you have to do it for the small stuff. Birds don't care about your plans. Neither do mosquitoes. 2 hours in, I found a channel that had eaten into the levee. It opened on a wide flat of water, only knee-deep with cypress spread out like old poles holding up nothing. From where I stood, I could see where the last flood had stopped. It left a ring of flattened seeds and trash. Bottle caps, a cracked ice chest lid, a child's foam flip-flop with cartoon eyes rubbed off. 10 feet above that line, nailed to a cypress trunk with big galvanized spikes, sat a coffin. I didn't have language for it at first. It was farther away than it sounds, and the light was flat. It looked like a long, dark box, and my brain did what brains do. It made it into a shed shelf, or maybe a storage crate someone had stashed up high. But the more I stared, the more it insisted on being what it was. The lid had that beveled edge. The wood looked sealed with tar at the seams, a black smear like someone's hand had pressed along the line and then wiped it on their pants. There weren't brass handles or any fancy trim. No markers, no paint. Just a box where a person would fit, hung up in a tree as if the ground had told it no. I stood there too long. The frogs kept going. The air thinned around me, and that way it does when you hold breath without meaning to. I took a couple of shots from where I was just to make sure I wasn't making it up. The zoom showed iron nails like railroad spikes, bent over after being driven through the lid and into the trunk. Whoever did it knew how to swing an 8-pound sledge and knew the water line. It was just above where the highest marks were. Like they'd checked a yardstick against the worst year anyone could remember and then added a foot for good luck. I tried to give it a normal explanation so I could keep working. There are cultures that raise their dead. There are people who use coffins as bait for stories. Maybe some kid crew did it as a dare. Maybe it was empty, a prop for a movie that ran out of money. I told myself all of that. Then I heard a smack of water behind me, a gar taking air. And I remembered where I was and how quick water moves when it wants to. And I headed back before the dark came in fast and got heavier than my boots. That night at the camp, I ate peanut butter on crackers on the porch and called my friend Leah in Tucson. She's the one who talks me through the weirdness on jobs. She's also blunt. "Don't touch it," she said. "Don't climb up there. Just don't." I wasn't planning to. "You say that," she chewed something. "Is there a caretaker you can call? Somebody who would know if that's normal there?" "I asked at the bait shop," I said. "They were friendly and not helpful. You could drive north and photograph ducks in a pond behind a Walmart. Call it a day." "I need the bayou shots," I said, and we let it sit. The frogs started and stopped like they were taking cues I couldn't hear. Somewhere on the river, somebody ran a small motor long past when anyone needed to. It droned, faded, reappeared, then cut. The window unit clicked and hummed. It was easy to fall asleep in that noise. It feels like a big animal is breathing and you fit into the rhythm. At 3 in the morning, I woke up because the camp had gone silent. Power outage. The window unit was off, so the air turned thick in seconds. Sweat ran into my ears. The silence was a shape. It pressed on everything. After a while, the frogs started again, but softer, like they were checking first. Then I heard a single creak from under the floor, the kind that comes from wood swelling. It wasn't much, just a change in the pitch of the house. I told myself the river had risen some and the pilings were adjusting. The smell through the screens changed from damp wood to something sweeter, like potting soil after rain. I lay there and counted slow to 100 and back down, and the power stayed off. Morning came with a colorless sun. The power flickered to life, then off, then on again. Coffee tasted like swamp. I drove into town with a list. More water, more DEET, a roll of duct tape because it always helps. Aline at the bait shop was there again. Same bright shirt, different earrings. "You're still here," she said. "Found something out there yesterday," I said. "Up a cypress. A coffin." She didn't flinch, but her smile stopped. "You got what you came for then?" she said. "That's not what I came for." She looked past me at a man carrying ice. When he was gone, she said, "Water remembers." I waited for more. She didn't give me any. "What does that mean?" I asked. "In this context." "It means," she said, like she was tidying a counter that didn't need it. "It brings back whatever you put in it." "That box has nails through it," I said. "It's not going anywhere." "Good," she said, and then she rang up my things and gave me 2 extra bottles of bug spray without charging me. "For the road," she said. "And don't let it watch you." "I'm sorry?" "Some things watch through wood," she said. Too soft, like I wasn't supposed to hear it. And then the shovel-faced man came out from the back room with a cigarette tucked behind his ear. And she changed the subject to the saints like we were in any other store. I could have left then. I could have pretended I was spooked by a snake and cut the trip short. But once you've seen something like that, you carry it around until you go back and make it smaller. That's how I've always done it. You push it into the shape of a story you can tell at dinner, and then it doesn't own your head. So I drove back with the tripod in the back and told myself I'd take a few straight-on shots and move on. No climbing. No touching. On the way out, a local guide truck pulled alongside me at a stop sign, window down. The guy had forearms like rope and a yellow slicker bunched behind his neck. He looked about my age. He said, "You in the Talbot camp?" I said yes. He said his name was Andre. "I help with the place when the river comes up," he said. "You need anything? You ask." He talked with that stretched-out calm you hear from people who've had to wait on water their whole lives. "I worry about my car if the rain comes," I said. "Park it higher," he said. "Put your camera bag by the door. If it goes fast, don't try to save anything." "Good pep talk," I said. "You laugh now," he said, and he didn't laugh back. "You were out by the cut," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He looked at my hands on the wheel like he could see shaking I wasn't doing yet. "If you see something nailed where it's not supposed to be," he said, "you leave it. And don't ask the old ones why. They'll tell you a pretty saying and nothing else." "Water remembers," I said. He winced. "They got that from a song," he said. "They use it to cover a lot. What's it covering?" "You don't want the work of that answer," he said, and he tapped his fingers on his door in a rhythm that didn't go with anything. "Keep your porch light off at night," he said. "You don't want bugs, and you don't want anything that eats bugs." He rolled up his window and drove on. It took half a mile for my breath to settle. I went back to the levee cut. The light was better now. You could see how the box was fitted. The spikes went through the lid into the trunk. That surprised me. I'd thought they nailed the shelf first. But no, the box itself was pinned. The lid seam had pitch, and in 3 places the pitch had cracked and looked new, like it had been patched. The bark around the nails had scarred thick. Not yesterday's work. Years. I stepped up on a knee to get a cleaner angle, and I felt watched. The same way you feel it when you're at a crosswalk and a car inches up too close. I turned slow. Nothing. A limp cypress frond. A dragonfly doing that helicopter hover. Far off, a boat engine coughed and failed, then coughed again. I took the shots and backed away. Something bumped the water near my left boot and I flinched. Then laughed at myself when it turned out to be a turtle coming up for air like a small periscope. On the way back, I stopped and listened to the wind through the bald tops. It made a hollow tone, almost like someone moving in the next room, not talking, just shifting weight. It occurred to me that wind, frogs, and insects can hide other sounds very well. That night, the storm finally came. Not all at once. First, a line of cloud that stopped short of the sun and turned the afternoon gray at 3. Then heat lightning. Then a gust front that moved grit across the porch floor and rattled the aluminum ladder under the house. The generator at a camp downriver kicked on early, anticipating. I sat at the tiny table and reviewed shots. When I zoomed on the coffin, I saw marks along the lid, shallow scratches paired like knuckles dragging. That's a dramatic way to put it. They were just lines. It could have been anything. Bark does that. But they weren't in the bark. They were in the lid, and they were clean. That would be boring if you didn't know where the box was. I knew where the box was. I told myself the marks were old. The camera date stamp doesn't tell you age. It tells you when you looked. I turned on the porch light without thinking. It brought a sheet of moths to the screen. In under a minute, the screen turned alive. Wings like paper, bodies like dust. Something hit the screen from outside, down low, and stuck there. At first I thought bat, then it was a frog, a big one. Belly pressed to the mesh, toes splayed, mouth opening and closing like it had discovered a wall that shouldn't be there. Another hit, then another. They stuck and slid down and stuck again. I turned the light off and they fell away. I sat still while my heart ran, phone buzzed. A text from Leah. "You okay? Radar looks ugly." I typed that I was fine, that I was going to get one more morning and then head back. I didn't send a shot of the box. It felt like handing something over I didn't own. Around 11, the rain started with that loud first minute. Big drops on hot metal. The roof pinged. The porch boards took on a darker line. The air pushed in under the door. The camp shifted just a little, like someone had leaned on it. I went to bed in my clothes with the bag by the door, like Andre said, and the car key in my pocket. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the smell of old dirt again. The power was off. The rain had found a steady drum. The frogs were quiet. That bothered me more than the dark. The quiet held for a half minute. Then it broke with a slow creak from the pilings. Then a thump under the floor as if a log had passed and knocked one post on its way. That happened twice last year in a flood. The rental owner had said, "Logs come, they hit and go. It's normal." but there was a drag after the thump, like rope pulled over wet wood. It moved along under the house and then stopped beneath the bedroom. I lay there with my eyes wide and saw nothing, because there was nothing to see. Footsteps on the porch next. Not heavy. I keep wanting to write deliberate, but that makes it sound like a choice you can feel in your bones. It was just weight where weight shouldn't be. A step, the pause you make when you test a board, another step. Then the screen door eased open and whined and eased shut. I decided it was wind and then immediately knew it wasn't because I didn't hear wind except as a steady push on the trees. The black shape of the door held still. I said, "Hello?" And my voice sounded wrong inside that little box. Nothing. "Hey." Louder. "You okay?" A long breath outside, the kind people take before talking. I could hear it through the screen because the thick air carried it. It was shallow and quick, then slowed. It had a pattern that wasn't mine. The shape at the door blurred and then formed again. I couldn't tell if someone was there or not. I stood, put my hand on the knob and froze because the knob was cold in a way that didn't match the rest of the room. I took my hand away. I waited. The porch board near the door gave once more as if weight shifted. Then a scrape, the length of a shoe sole, and the board went silent. The screen door sighed a little, then lay back against the frame. I didn't open the door. I couldn't make myself do it. I stood there with my ear an inch from mesh and heard the rain, and behind it, something counting in the breaths between drops. I must have slept for a while after that because the next time I checked the phone it was 3:30. The rain had become a sheet. I couldn't see the yard. The water under the house had risen high enough that small waves slapped the bottom like hands. Each slap made the house stiffen. In one of the slaps I heard a sound I first called wood complaining, and then couldn't keep clean in my head. It was a long, hollow groan that resolved at the end into a knock, knock, knock. 3 taps, evenly spaced, the kind you make to test a lid. By 5, the worst of it passed, but the water kept climbing. Dawn showed a flat gray line where the yard had been. My car sat where I'd left it, higher than the camp, but not by much. The frogs began again with a soft clicking, like someone setting a metronome. I paced, then I couldn't stand pacing, so I put on the waders and walked the porch. The boards were slick. The rail shook under my hand. The ladder under the house had floated loose and knocked against a piling like it was asking a question. I told myself I could check the levee quickly, see what the cut looked like with the water up and come right back. It was a dumb idea. I did it anyway. The cut roared. It had been a quiet chew on the bank the day before. Now it was a mouth pulling water through. The trees had lost their shapes and made a single gray wall. I could smell gas from a boat I couldn't see. It was hard to hear anything under the water's sound. And yet above it I could hear a creak from the direction of the cypress with the box. Not a single pop like wood taking on rain. A slow, repeated sound. Wood rubbed against wood. Something straining. The rain wasn't pouring then. It was a steady fall that better ears would call light. But the creek rose and sank and rose again. I made myself go closer. The water line that had been 10 feet below the coffin was now 4. The box's tar seams were wet and dark. One of the big nails had shifted enough that you could see bright metal where it had been covered by rust. The spike at the foot end had a hairline crack in the bark around it. That's a normal thing for a tree that grows. The wood swells, but this hadn't been there yesterday. Inside the lid, something moved. I can't make it plainer than that. I didn't see a hand. I didn't see a shape press up. I saw the lid rise less than a finger width along one side, then settle. When it settled, it pushed a little line of water off the top where the rain had collected. The line ran and dripped. I saw that drip like it was the only thing in the world. I said, "Hello?" and hated myself because I sounded like somebody who'd climbed too many stairs. The lid didn't move again. A gust of wind bowed the trees. A bit of bright green ribbon caught a branch and wound around it. The water lapped the trunk and slapped like it had words it was not quite saying. From the corner of my eye, I saw a person on the levee behind me. I turned. Andre stood there in his slicker, rain hood down, hair plastered to his head. "You don't want to be here," he said. "What is it?" I said, and I pointed in case he might pretend not to see it. His mouth tightened. "It's what it looks like," he said, which is not an answer. He came down a step and then stopped. He glanced at my camera hanging from my neck like it had weight he didn't like. "Don't take any more," he said. "You took some yesterday. Leave it at that." "There's something in it," I said. My voice came out small. "There's something everywhere," he said. "And we don't open everything to see which kind it is." "Who did it?" He said nothing. Why did they do it? He looked at the water, and the water looked like it was looking back. Sometimes, he said, picking words out of a place he didn't want to visit, a person goes down wrong. Not far, not dead, just wrong, and the ground won't take them or the family won't. So, he flicked his hand toward the tree, high and dry, out of reach. That's not... I stopped because my brain offered up all the ways people fail in floods, in hospitals, on porches when air goes thin, and I couldn't pick one. How would that help anyone? It doesn't help anyone, he said. It keeps other things from getting worse. We stood in the rain and listened to the wood expand. It made a low sound that settled in my chest. The lid rose again a sliver and fell. It wasn't much. It was enough. You hear it? I said. I hear wood swell, he said. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Water remembers, I said, trying to make the words bite less. That's the line, right? He looked like he wanted to spit and didn't. Water brings back what you put in it, he said. That's different than remembering. And what did they put in it? I'm going to get you back to your car, he said. You're leaving before they close the road. Who's they? I asked, and he shook his head. He took my elbow like I was a child and walked me back along the levee with water hurrying on both sides. I kept looking over my shoulder toward the tree line. I don't know what I expected to see. A figure, a face. What I saw were shadows cutting between trunks where there was no one to make them. You know how sometimes there's a pocket of cooler air in a warm room? You walk through it and you feel it split around you. I felt that on the levee. The hair on my forearm stood up under my jacket. Andre didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the road. We got to the camp. The porch had a line of dried mud now that made it look like it was wearing a ring. My bag was where I'd left it by the door, only there were 3 rust flakes near it that hadn't been there before. I told myself they came from a nail in the ceiling. I told myself a lot of things. Andre waited while I stuffed my gear. He had the motor running on his truck. You'll come back in the fall, he said like it was a question. I don't know. I wouldn't, he said. Then he half smiled like he knew he was being theatrical and didn't care. When it rains, he said, you keep your radio loud. He drove behind me until the blacktop got wide again. The water followed to the ditch and then stopped. I didn't breathe easy until I saw a sign I recognized from the highway. The storm ran along with me the whole way north, a line in the mirror that never got farther away. On a dry stretch near a gas station, I pulled over and had to sit with my hands on the wheel until the shaking settled. I don't tear up easy. I did then for no clean reason. It was the noise in my head more than anything else. The creak and the knock and that breath at the door, all laid on top of each other like tracks. Back in Lafayette, I returned the key to a man who didn't look up from the baseball game on his phone. Flood get you? He asked without interest. I said no, not really. At the airport, a woman in line a few people ahead of me had a wet hem and bare feet and flip-flops even though it wasn't raining where we were. She kept rubbing one toe against the other, slow, like she was counting with them. I made myself look away. The flight attendant mispronounced Atchafalaya in the safety spiel, and a man across the aisle snorted and told his wife, "People don't even try." Normal life asserted itself. It does that. You let it. A week later, home, I pulled up the photos. The frogs looked like frogs. The turtles did the little pointy nose thing. The water was that flat brown that photographs badly unless you lie about it. Then there was the box. The close shots had more detail than I remembered. They always do. You focus on a thing and miss the thing next to it. In one frame, between lid and trunk, there was a sliver of dark that wasn't shadow. It was shaped like a lip or wood or nothing you could name. In another, the tar seam had a slight ripple not caused by rain. I zoomed until pixels turned into squares and told myself I was seeing artifacts. I almost sent a few to Leah. I didn't. I kept thinking of what Andre said about not taking anymore, as if a photo taken a day later could do more harm than one taken a day before. That isn't logical. It felt true anyway. People ask for a clean end to stories like this. They want a deputy to show up and say the box was empty. Just a hunter's prank. They want a date carved on the side, a family name, a reason that only looks ugly until you have the context. I didn't get any of that. I got a stale smell when the air went quiet, and a set of footsteps on a porch I never saw, and the way my chest went cold at the idea of turning a knob in the dark. I got a face behind a minnow tank that didn't blink. The magazine ran the turtle shot. They didn't ask about the others. No one calls you to say, "Do you have anything with wood that sounds like it's breathing?" You keep those to yourself, or you tell a friend and they say, "Well, swamp things settle," and you agree so you can sleep. Now when it rains at home, dry home, desert home, not a cypress for 1,000 miles, I notice the first change in air. I notice the silence that comes before the gutters begin. I hear my own house test its joints. The other day, the window frame cracked loud because the sun hit it after a shower, and I had to sit down on the edge of the bed for a second and hold my breath like I was hearing it again. People say smells stay with you. Sounds will stay too. A door opening. A knock where a knock shouldn't be. A slow creak over water in a place where the ground has a memory and is tired of doing the work for us. I left before the storm finished. I don't know what that says about me. Sensible, maybe. Cowardly, maybe. Smart enough not to ask for an explanation I didn't deserve. Stupid enough to go back to the cut twice when once was plenty. You could put any of those on a card and it would fit. I didn't touch the box. I didn't put my ear to it. I didn't test the lid with my hand to feel the give. I'm proud of that. Or maybe I'm ashamed. Both things can be true. Either way, I hear it when I don't want to. Rain on metal. The hush after power goes. The push of water under floorboards. The nails that weren't rusted yesterday. Falling near a bag by a door. I still hear wood swelling when it rains. I took the job because they called the night before and said the regular guy had the flu. It was a Thursday in late September, the kind of dry, bright day we get before the cold starts to stick around. The district office gave me the name of the school and told me to check in with the secretary at 7:30. It was a rural elementary outside of Fayette. Low brick building, long field behind it that went right up to a line of cottonwoods and a rusty chain-link fence. Past that, open pasture with a cow pond and a busted windmill that never turned. The air when I got out of my car smelled like cut grass and chalk and a little bit like asphalt heating up. Buses were lining up. Kids were already dragging their backpacks along the sidewalk. The sign out front had one of those letterboards that said, "Be kind to each other," because they'd run out of ease. I signed in at the office. Donna at the front desk was friendly in that, "I'm doing this because it's my job way." She gave me the attendance clipboard, the emergency procedures sheet, and a squeaky keyring that had a little rubber paw on it. "Room 12, she said.
"Fourth grade."
"You'll have recess duty at 10:15. They'll tell you where to stand." She had a pencil stuck behind her ear and a mug that said "Not My Circus" in huge letters. A man in a polo shirt, board member or maybe a dad, was backing out of the office while talking into his phone. He kept saying, "We'll get ahead of it." The classroom was simple. Whiteboard, a tired rug with the alphabet around the edge, those tiny chairs that make you feel like you're in a dollhouse. Someone had drawn a lopsided giraffe on the board and written, "Ask me about our money jars," in dry erase. A poster of the multiplication table was curling off the wall. There was a faint electric buzz from the overhead lights and the smell of pencil shavings that never really goes away in those rooms. The kids were fine. They're always fine the first hour. They sized me up when they sat down. "You're not Mr. K," one boy announced like the prosecution. "Correct," I said. "I'm Mr. Kearns for today. What's your first name?" Another girl asked. She had hair in a high ponytail, already messy, a Band-Aid on her elbow. "Adam," I said, and regretted it. Fourth graders love using your first name in a way that makes you feel like a very small landlord. We did the usual. Pledges, morning work, some reading. I got through an hour of a book about a dog and a girl moving to a new town by using different voices and making it seem like I planned to stop at a cliffhanger. It was easy. I only noticed the weird thing at recess. They sent me out with a whistle and a laminated map of zones. My job was to stand on the edge of the field and keep them from going into the ditch or climbing the fence out toward the pasture. The grass behind the building was short and damp. You could see the mower lines like the lines on a baseball field. The sun hit the windows and bounced back at an angle that made everyone squint. There was a hint of sweat and cafeteria soap. Someone had lost a pink headband on the blacktop, and a line of ants were using it as a bridge. It took me a couple minutes to realize the kids weren't using the whole field. They ran across it on paths like highways, the way kids do. But they bent around an oval patch near the middle. It was a bare spot the size of a small car. The dirt was hard and smooth like it had been tamped down. The rest of the field had that stubborn rural grass that grows even next to gravel, but this spot was clean, like someone had taken sandpaper to it. The kids curved around it without looking right at it. Some slowed a hair, then sped up. 2 boys rolled a ball to each other and let it skirt the edge rather than go across it. I walked closer because that's what you do. The dirt was dry. No cigarette butts, no dog mess. It wasn't a puddle. There were no ants there, even though there were ants everywhere else. The shape struck me, not in a dramatic way, but in that quiet way. The long oval with squared-off ends, rounded corners. Honest to God, it looked like a grave would look if someone laid it out on a diagram, but you can convince yourself anything looks like anything if you want. A boy named Eli saw me looking. He had a buzz cut and those rubber bracelets kids trade. He was eating applesauce out of a cup in big spoonfuls. "That's the marker," he said like it was obvious. "What's it mark?" I said. He shrugged and scraped his spoon around for the last bit. "Just the marker. You don't step on it, why not? They tell the kindergartners not to," he said. "So they don't get in people's way." "What people?" I asked. He didn't answer. He tossed his cup in a trash bag that was blown up by the wind and wandered off toward the swings. I asked another kid later, a girl named Mariah. She had a small notebook she kept in her pocket and wrote in after she went down the slide. "Why don't you go on that dirt spot?" I said, and tried to keep it casual. "My brother says that's where Coach used to put the bases for baseball," she said, "but Coach doesn't work here anymore. So we don't use it." That was something. It wasn't good, but it was something. I tried the explanation on myself and it felt flimsy but workable. If they used to put a base there, okay. But there would be 3 bases and a plate, and the throttle of use would make 3 more spots. There was only the one. I looked around for the others. Nothing. When we lined up to go back inside, one boy stepped out of line to pick up a dropped eraser cap. He was about to shortcut across the oval to get back to the line, and 4 kids grabbed his backpack straps and hauled him back. They weren't joking. They didn't shout. They did it like someone might do CPR. It happened fast. The boy didn't resist. He looked embarrassed, like he'd forgotten a rule. The rest of the morning moved along. Kids do that. They fold strange stuff into their day so easily that you start to think you made the strange part up. I forgot about the dirt patch while I taught long division, then remembered when I went to write an example, and the dry erase markers squealed in a way that made a couple of them laugh. At lunch, I sat in the teacher's lounge and ate the peanut butter sandwich I'd grabbed from my counter. The lounge had 2 fridges, one with a sign that said "Student lunches only, yes, we mean it," and one with magnets shaped like cows. The microwave door stuck. A bulletin board had copies of a flyer about safety drills that looked 3 years old. A woman with short dark hair was rinsing her Tupperware at the sink. "You're the sub in 12th?" she asked. "That's me," I said. "I'm Sophia," she said. "Lopez, I'm down in 5. She had the kind of voice that makes kids tell the truth. Another teacher named Pete came in, taller, bald, and announced he'd had someone put a penny in the electric pencil sharpener again, and he was taking a stand. I asked Sophia about the field, because it felt like the normal place to put it. "Does the mower guy leave a big bare patch out there on purpose?" I said. "The kids go around it like it's hot lava." She looked at me and then out the small window like she was calculating. Pete grabbed a yogurt from the fridge and sat down. "What patch?" Pete asked. "The oval in the middle of the field," I said. "Looks like where a base would be if you only had one base." Sophia said, "You get used to it." She said it like someone giving directions to a road with a narrow bridge. Then she said, "You'll be fine. It's Missouri weird. Every school's got a thing." Pete opened his yogurt and said, "Just don't let kids play king of the hill on the dirt or we get calls." He shrugged. "It's probably just where the sprinkler system busted and the ground got salty." We went back to work. In the afternoon, the classroom was warmer and quieter. That hum of the vent that I didn't hear in the morning was suddenly very loud. The kids got sleepy. I moved to math games and then art. Every time I caught sight of the field through the glass, that patch felt like it had shifted closer to the building. It hadn't. The light had moved. But I became aware of it the way you're aware of someone staring at the back of your head in a restaurant. No one was out at recess then. The field was empty. A breeze went through the cottonwoods and the leaves sounded like paper moving. I left a note for the regular teacher, stacked the graded papers, turned off the projector, and walked the key ring back to the office. Donna was on the phone. I slid the key onto the desk and raised a hand. She nodded. When I went back out to the parking lot, I thought about stepping out to the field and putting my foot right in the middle of that oval, just to prove to myself it was nothing. I didn't. The bus drivers were watching me over their sunglasses, and who needs to be that guy? The next morning they called me back because the original guy was still out. When I came in, the building felt a little empty. Not bad empty, just that feeling when you open a house that has been closed a while. You can smell the walls. We did morning things again. I told them we'd finish the dog book at the end of the day if we made it through the spelling list. They perked up. When I took them out for recess the second day, the patch looked sharper, maybe because the mower lines had faded a little, and that bare spot held the light different. The kids didn't need any reminders to avoid it. 2 kindergartners from another class ran past holding hands, and they split around the spot like water around a rock, and then joined back up. I squatted down by the edge and rubbed my fingers across it. The dirt wasn't loose. It didn't crumble. It was like a floor that happened to be made of dirt. No weeds even trying, not even those tiny ones that look like green freckles. The air above it felt cooler on my calves. I stuck my hand out over it and felt nothing, which, to be clear, is what you usually feel when you stick your hand out over the ground. Still, my brain filed that nothing away like it was something. Eli came over. "Don't," he said. "What happens if I do?" I said. He thought about it. "You'll get yelled at," he decided. "By who?" He chewed his lip. "The janitor, probably. Has he yelled at you?" "I don't give him a reason to," he said, like it was just good policy. When the whistle blew and we lined up, I counted heads and felt a prickling crawl up my neck. You know that feeling when you remember you left the stove on, like there's a voice in your body that isn't words and it taps you on the shoulder. I looked out at the windowed wall of the cafeteria where you can see your own reflection if you stand in a certain spot. In that glass, I saw our line and the patch out in the field, and this is where it gets tricky. What looked like the outline of someone standing right on that bare ground. Not a person. The shape of a person if the air decided to stand up. A suggestion. It took me a second to realize I was seeing a double reflection of something behind me, layered onto the field, except when I turned, there was nobody there. It was the painted outline of a mascot on the blacktop, and my eyes had mixed it into the distance. I did the thing where you laugh at yourself for scaring yourself. I didn't laugh very hard. In the afternoon, Sophia came into my room and asked if I could cover her dismissal duty so she could make a phone call. I said sure. The duty was at the end of the hall by the double doors that go out toward the field. The metal doors had slitted windows at eye level. When you stand there, you get little slices of outside. The light was strong. The kids queued up. A boy in a baseball cap cut his place and his friend shoved him, and I told them to knock it off without looking. In one of the glass slices, the oval dirt spot sat there like a button no one pushed. A plastic grocery bag was caught in the chain link along the edge of the property, snapping in the wind. I heard footsteps behind me in the empty hallway. Honest tapping steps, slow like a teacher in real shoes, not sneakers. I half turned and said, "We're lining up, ready to push some kid back into his place." The hall was empty. The vent above the trophy case rattled and then settled. I waited to see if the steps would happen again. They didn't. The longer I waited, the more obvious it was that I was waiting for nothing. I finished dismissal, then stood at the doors a second longer than I needed to and watched dust spin in the sun. On the third day, they called me again. I said yes because that's how I make my money. The morning felt normal. The kids were loose, Friday energy, talking about pizza sticks for lunch. We did a spelling quiz and a science worksheet where they draw a plant and label it. I told them roots don't like light, which is a simple thing that always makes a couple eyes go wide. "Why don't roots have eyes?" a boy asked. "They don't need them," I said. The fire alarm clicked, then cracked on for a second and died. Every head lifted. Donna's voice came on the PA and said, "Please ignore that." The intercom clicked off. It clicked on again, and we could hear the breath of someone close to the mic for half a second before it went dead. At recess, the sky had gone gray without doing anything about it. The wind picked up enough that the swings creaked and you heard the flag rope knock the pole. The patch of dirt looked almost black with the light flattened. I watched the kids and kept them from going too close to the drainage ditch, and then I saw a small group near the bare spot. They weren't stepping on it. They were standing on the safe side looking at it like you look at a bee on a window. One girl reached a toe out and pushed a leaf onto it. The leaf sat there. They watched the leaf the way you watch bread in a toaster. After 10 seconds, because I counted, a boy said, "Okay," and they all walked away fast. When they lined up, a kid near the front asked, "Did you see it?" With that voice that wants someone else to admit they saw the same weird thing. "See what?" I said, because I didn't want to lead. "The ripple," he said. "When she did that." "I saw the leaf," I said. "That's all I saw." He nodded like he knew I was lying even if I wasn't. It bothered me more than it should have. After school, I stayed a little late to stack chairs and make the room look less like a trash can. The building settles around 4 o'clock. It gets quiet in a busy way. Distant vacuums, a ball bouncing twice somewhere and then done. The air in the hall goes still, then kicks on. You can hear yourself think in a way that isn't comfortable if you've been managing 10-year-olds all day. I took the attendance clipboard back to the office. Donna was gone. The principal, Pfeiffer, a tall man with a tie that looked like it came with the shirt, was at his desk behind the glass. He looked at me and then at the clock and then pretended to keep typing. I put the clipboard in the tray. On my way back, I saw the janitor for the first time. He was at the end of the hall down by the doors that go to the gym, pushing a cart with a mop bucket. He was one of those men who's older than you know. Not frail. Just like he would look the same 10 years ago and 10 years from now. He had a denim shirt with his name stitched in the patch, Dodd, and he moved steady like someone who has learned to avoid breaking things without thinking about it anymore. "Hey," I said, because it felt weird to pretend we didn't see each other. He looked up. "You're the sub," he said, not as a question. "Yeah, Adam," he nodded once and kept rolling. He stopped by the doors that look out to the field. The light hit his face in strips. He stopped and looked through the glass before pushing the bar. We both stood there and watched empty grass and that bare shape. The day had browned out to late. The sound of the interstate 3 miles away had found the wind again. I wanted to ask him a question that made me look sane, and not like someone who had been thinking about a rectangle of dirt too much. "Kids don't go near that," I finally said. "Is there a reason? I don't want to break a rule I don't know." He looked at me and then back at the field. The pause got long enough that I felt hot under my shirt. "Best to let some things alone," he said. His voice was plain, not ominous. "Just a guy's voice. Is it like a drainage thing?" I said. "Or a sprinkler underneath?" I wasn't going to dig it up or anything. "I can just tell them to leave it." He ran his hand along the push bar and then let the door close. "They already leave it," he said. He started to move. I stood there wishing I'd asked nothing. Then he stopped and said, "Grounds crew tried to reseat it once." He squinted a little. "Twice before your time." "Before most of their time?" "Nothing takes. What's the deal then?" I said. I could hear myself pressing. "Just salt?" "Chemical." He looked at me and I don't know what he saw. Maybe a man who doesn't know when not to tug at something. He said, "A long time back there was a thing that happened." He said it like he was choosing his words from a shelf. "Not a day you put on a calendar. Not a thing you put on a plaque. But you remember it if you were here." He looked through me at something behind my shoulder. "That's where they marked it." "What is it?" I asked. I heard myself and wanted to back away from my own mouth. He seemed to make up his mind. "That's where they buried the time no one talks about." He said it without leaning on any part of it. Then he pushed through the door with his shoulder and went out to empty the small trash bins along the path. I stayed in the hall for a second, like someone who walked into a room and forgot why. Then I went back to 12 and pretended to erase the board, and it was dark when I got to my car. I didn't sleep right that night. That's not notable. I often don't sleep right. But when I woke up at 2 to get water, I had the taste in my mouth you have when you went swimming and swallowed a little, except it was dirt. It went away while I stood there and tried not to think about it. They called me again for Monday. "They always want you one more day." I said yes before I could invent a reason to say no. Driving there, the radio fizzed out to static on the highway near the tall antenna that's supposed to give you better reception. The field looked as it had looked every morning. Still, the patch sat in its place. The kids came in with new stories. They'd seen a tractor trailer with a giant fake cow on it on the way to school. They'd traded chips at breakfast. Little human stuff. I drank coffee from a dented thermos that made it taste like pennies. Before lunch, Sophia stopped by and said, "Hey, you doing okay?" And I said, "Sure," like a liar. She looked at my face for a beat. "The floor by the double doors was muddy this morning," she said. "But the rain missed us." I waited for the part where it turned into a normal thing. She didn't add it. She looked at the windows. "Sophia," I said.
What is that thing in the field?
She rubbed the side of her nose. "I've been here 9 years," she said. "Before me, there were older folks who retired right when I started. People don't say much. They've got 100 ways to not say something." Coach left. The principal before Pfeiffer left. We had a drill one year that wasn't a drill. I mean, it was a drill later after. We call drills now what we called just kids being careful then. She waved her hand, frustrated with her own words. "I don't know. I just teach my kids to read and we go to recess, and sometimes I stare at that patch while I eat a granola bar, and I feel like my stomach is a new kind of shape. That's as much as I've got." She walked away before I could thank her for saying anything at all. We had indoor recess that day because the wind turned sharp and it smelled like a storm that never came. The hallway lights flickered for a second. The kids backed up from the flicker like it was a thing with hands. The building is old. It happens. But they got quick and quiet in a way I didn't expect from this bunch. While they colored at their desks and built those little structures with popsicle sticks, I used the bathroom down the hall. On the way back, the corridor had that lazy echo to it, like the sound had moved in and was taking its time leaving. I heard short footsteps behind me, not hurrying, just a steady pace. I turned and looked down toward the double doors. No one. The steps stopped. When I turned forward, the sound of a cart squeaked from the far end. Dodd rolled past an intersection, didn't look my way. I told myself it had been Dodd and nothing else. I put my hand on the door to my room and felt a little grit under my fingers. I looked down. There was a line of dirt along the threshold, like someone had run a finger through dust. I stuck my toe over the line and wiped it away. The kids were fine. They don't care if the building makes noise. They care if you act like it does. I kept my face steady. At dismissal, I was back at the double doors. The weather had shifted again, clear and flat. The bare spot was no darker or lighter than the rest, but it held the eye. I let 2 kids out to their mom. I looked back. In the slice of glass nearest the handle, I saw myself in the empty hallway behind me and, for a second, something else. It looked like a kid standing behind me in the hallway, chin level with the middle of my back. The reflection of a small face turned toward the outside. It wasn't a face exactly, just a circle of a head, the suggestion of a shoulder. The sort of thing you see in glass when a coat is hung in the right shape. My heart did a quick, stupid thing. I turned, there was nobody. My coat was on the back of a chair in 12. No jackets hung in the hall. I put my hand on the bar and pushed outside to breathe air that didn't feel like someone had exhaled first. Dodd was emptying a bin by the edge of the concrete. He straightened up slow, like he didn't want to spill the bag. He didn't look at me. "I'm just, for my own curiosity," I said, and heard the apology baked in. "When you said what you said about burying time." "What do you mean?" He didn't answer for a long few breaths. He tied the bag, then bent and dusted his hands together. "Sometimes something happens that shouldn't have happened here," he said. "Not the location, but the address of here. A thing that made all the clocks wrong for a minute. Or it didn't. And we call it that because we don't have claws on the words to hold it right." He looked up at the sky to see if it would give him something else. It didn't. They put a stake in the ground after. They took it up later. But the ground remembered where it had been. "Who did?" I asked. He shrugged. "Whoever needed something to do with their hands that day. You were here." "I'm still here," he said. He looked at me like I was missing the point. "And the kids aren't, the ones who were. They're not here. They're grown. Most of them. I see them sometimes at the grocery store and they talk too loud in the aisle." He lifted the bag and set it on the cart. "I told you more than I should. You'll leave and forget the shape of it except the part the ground makes you keep." "I'm just subbing," I said, and my voice felt light like lint. He nodded. "Then don't carry it out with you. Leave it here. It'll still be here without your help." I didn't have anything to say to that. I went back inside and signed out and waved to Donna and to Pfeiffer, who nodded like a priest. They didn't call me the next day or the next. The checks I got were enough to keep my rent on time. I did a couple days at the middle school in town, which smells like gym feet and spaghetti. I drove past the elementary once on my way to the county road. The field was there. The patch was there. Of course it was. 2 weeks later, they asked if I could cover a day for Sophia because of a training. I said sure before I connected the dots. I walked in like a man going back to a job he'd quit. The kid said my name like it was a funny word. We had a fine day. At lunch, I sat in my car with the windows down. The buses idled. That diesel tang mixed with the smell of short grass and the sweat the building sweats when it's full of people. I watched the field. Teachers who had duty were out there walking slow circles. A ball arced and then stopped rolling right at the edge of the bare spot, as if it found the lip of a curb you can't see. It didn't roll onto it. A boy ran toward the ball, then stopped short like someone put a hand flat to his chest. He looked around to see if anyone had seen him be careful. Then he walked an extra few steps around and picked up the ball from the safe side. I found myself counting breaths. In for 4, out for 7, the way a therapist once told me. It didn't help. The counting made the counting feel mechanical, which made my hands want something to do. I turned the radio on and off. When the bell rang, I went back in and told myself I was an adult, that I could walk across a yard like any other and step on whatever ground was in front of me. After school, I didn't go straight to my car. I told myself I was going to ask Dodd whether the office had a spare key for the supply cupboard. I don't know why I chose that. It sounded like a thing an adult would say. He wasn't at his card. I stood at the door that looked out at the field. The light was cloudy and it made everything look the same flat color, like someone had turned the saturation down a notch. I pushed the bar and stepped outside. It felt colder than it should have for October. The flag wasn't moving. The cottonwoods didn't move. The quiet wasn't perfect. In the distance, a dog barked twice. A car on the road out front slowed and then went on. A bird flew from the shade to the fence and the shadow passed over the dirt spot and it looked like it paused there. Of course it didn't. I was giving the world assignments it hadn't asked for. I walked out across the grass. My shoes got damp at the edges where the morning sprinklers had hit too long. My breath felt loud in my own head. I came to the line where the grass stopped and the dirt began. It was such a simple difference. Green and then not. I put my foot over the edge and thought about Dodd's plain voice and how there are people who live their whole lives in one building and carry it like a backpack. I thought about kids who learn rules that make no sense until you see how they keep you from being the kid who steps on certain ground. I took another breath. I thought, if nothing happens, then nothing happens and I can park somewhere else in my own head. If something happens, it's a thought. I'm a person who knows what thoughts feel like. I stepped forward. I don't have a violent story to tell you about what happened. I didn't sink. The earth didn't open. I didn't hear a choir. My foot met the hard dirt, and for a second I thought I felt it flex like the skin of a drum. But it could have been my knee. I put my other foot on it. I stood there on the spot that no one else stepped on. The air around my shins felt colder again, the way it had that first day. The wind moved somewhere I wasn't. I heard a noise like someone walking down a hall in socks. I turned my head toward the building, which stood still and square and indifferent. On the glass of the cafeteria, I saw myself standing out there in the field, a thin man in a jacket on dirt where grass should be. I saw the reflection of the door, and I saw, or thought I saw, in the row of reflected windows, a shape behind, one of them as if a person was standing inside watching me. Not obvious. Not a face. The suggestion again. The amount your mind needs to say, someone is there. It made my scalp feel tight. I lifted my hand before I thought about it and raised it to shoulder level like someone saying hello to a car that stopped to let them cross the street. The shape didn't move. The longer I looked, the more it became curtains and a poster and the way whiteboards reflect glare. I stood there 1 breath longer. Then I stood there 3 breaths longer because I wanted to prove to myself I wasn't taking orders from an empty rectangle. Then I stepped back onto the grass. When my foot hit the green, it felt warmer, or I told myself it did. I walked away and didn't look back until I was far enough that I could pretend I was only making sure I didn't leave my bag behind. No one yelled at me, no one noticed. Back inside, the hallway smelled like pine sol, and Dodd was wiping down the bottom of the trophy case with a rag. He didn't look up. Sophia walked past with a stack of worksheets and a pen clipped to her shirt. She said, "See you," and I said, "Yeah." I finished the day. I read the last chapter of the dog book and did the voices. 2 kids clapped because they didn't know what else to do. I wrote a note to Sophia in neat block letters because hers are neat and you mirror whoever you're writing for. I put the chairs up. I checked that the windows were latched. I looked out once and the field was the field and the patch was the patch. The edges looked clean. On my way to sign out, I passed the double doors and both panes showed me my face. I paused. Some days you do the thing twice to make sure it took. I looked at my own outline. I looked at the hallway behind me. No shape, no short steps. The vent above the door rattled and then went quiet. The building breathed and then didn't. Donna looked tired when I handed her the key ring. "Thanks," she said, and she meant it. I said, "Sure," and I meant it. I got to my car and sat there with my hands on the wheel for a long minute while the buses shook the air. I looked at the field one last time, because I'm that kind of person and I don't like being that kind of person, but here we are. I didn't see anything. Just grass and not grass and a fence and trees and sky all in their places. I drove away, and for 10 miles it felt like there was a weight right behind my seat on the floor, like I'd picked something up with the bottom of my shoes and it was rolling around back there. When I stopped for gas at the Casey's, I shoved the mat around with my foot. Nothing. They called me twice after that for the same school. I said I was booked even when I wasn't. They'll find someone else. They always do. That place will go on being itself without me. Kids will do the pledge and eat pizza sticks and draw the middle of flowers too big. Somebody will mow lines into the grass and not over the spare ground. Dodd will wash a rack and empty a bin and tie the bag like it matters. Sophia will teach a kid to sound out the word through and pretend it makes sense that it's spelled that way. He never returned to that school. The bare earth looked patient.